The ghost of who Michael Reynolds used to be haunted the stale air of his small third-floor apartment, 52 years old. But the lines etched around his eyes and bracketing his mouth were carved by more than time. They were maps of sleepless nights and desert suns of memories that clung to him like sand in his clothes. Michael was a man built on a sturdy frame, tall and once broad-shouldered, but now a subtle stoop suggested a weight far heavier than flesh and bone. His brown hair, cut short in the unshakable habit of a military man, was surrendering to a distinguished silver at the temples. It was a face that could have been handsome, rugged, even, but was now mostly just tired. He had once been Lieutenant Commander Reynolds of the Navy SEALs, a man his wife adored and his two children looked up to with wide admiring eyes. He had been the pride of his family. Now he was just Michael, a name that felt hollowed out and foreign on his own tongue. The uniform was packed away in a footlocker he never opened. The wife and children were ghosts, two living in cheerful sunlit photographs on a dusty mantelpiece he tried not to look at. They had left not out of malice, but out of weary self-preservation. The man who came back from the war was not the husband and father who had left. The battlefield had followed him home, setting up a permanent outpost in his mind, and his chosen weapon was the amber liquid in the bottle that was never far from his hand. A low whine broke the oppressive silence. Michael looked down from the grimy window overlooking a rain-slicked Portland street. A large, wet nose nudged his idle hand. Ranger, his only constant, his shadow. His anchor, a 5-year-old German shepherd of striking appearance. His thick coat was a handsome mix of silver gray and white, more wolf than dog. His ears were perpetually alert, his dark, intelligent eyes missing nothing. Ranger possessed the quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty of his breed, a calm, steady presence in the storm of Michael's life. He moved with a silent grace, his temperament a perfect counterbalance to Michael's own jagged edges. Right now, those eyes held a look of gentle concern. "I'm all right, boy," Michael rasped, his voice rough from disuse. He scratched behind Ranger's ears, the simple, repetitive motion a small comfort. Ranger leaned into the touch, a silent reassurance that he was not going anywhere. The truth was, Michael was not all right. The day had started badly and was spiraling downward. A car, backfiring on the street below, had sent him diving for cover behind the sofa, his heart hammering against his ribs, the smell of cordite and dust filling his senses. The memory faded, but the tremor in his hands remained. His first instinct, the one he had trained himself to obey, was to reach for the whiskey bottle on the coffee table. That night, the ghosts were particularly loud. He drank to silence them, pouring glass after glass until the room blurred and the sharp edges of his pain grew dull. He didn't remember falling. He awoke to the rough, insistent lick of Ranger's tongue on his cheek and a low, distressed whine. The sun was a cruel sliver of light cutting through the blinds. Michael was on the floor, his head throbbing with a vicious rhythm. The empty whiskey bottle lay on its side a few feet away, a fallen soldier. He pushed himself up, his body aching in protest, and caught his reflection in the dark screen of the television. He saw a stranger, a gaunt, hollow-eyed man with a slack jaw and a posture that spoke of deep soul sickness. Ranger whined again, nudging his hand, his eyes filled with an unbearable, knowing sadness. In that moment, looking at the reflection of the man he had become and seeing the unconditional love and worry in his dog's eyes, something inside Michael snapped. It was not a loud crack, but a quiet, profound shifting. He could continue this slow, pathetic descent and die alone on this floor with only his dog to mourn him, or he could change. The thought was terrifying. Change required an energy he wasn't sure he still possessed. But the alternative, the image of his own lonely death, was even more frightening. He stumbled to his feet and walked past the whiskey bottle, heading for the shower. For the first time in a long time, he was choosing something other than oblivion. The decision once made set off a cascade of others. This city was killing him. Every siren, every shout, every crowded street was a trigger. He needed silence. He needed space. He needed to get out. His savings were almost gone, bled dry by rent and alcohol. He owned his old pickup truck and the few pieces of furniture in the apartment. It wasn't much. He sold the truck first, the last tangible piece of his former life. The cash felt heavy and inadequate in his pocket. It wouldn't be enough for a new life, but maybe, just maybe, it was enough for a new start. That night, instead of opening a bottle, he opened his laptop. He scrolled past rental listings he couldn't afford. He wasn't looking for another apartment, another box to slowly die in. He was looking for a lifeline. On a whim, he typed Rural Property Auction Oregon into the search bar. He found a county website for tax-delinquent properties. Most were small parcels of land or homes that started far beyond his reach. But then he saw it, a listing with a single grainy photo. An old farmhouse, its paint peeling, surrounded by overgrown land. The description was brutally honest. Significant structural issues, no utilities connected, sold as is. But the starting bid was only a few hundred. It was located in a remote part of the state, miles from any real town. It was perfect. With a trembling hand, Michael registered for the online auction. He sat there, Ranger's heavy head resting on his knee, and watched the countdown timer. This was it, his final gamble. When the bidding started, he placed his bid, a number that represented nearly every dollar he had to his name. For a heart-stopping minute, another bidder competed with him, but they soon dropped out. A message flashed on the screen: sold. He had just bought a broken-down farmhouse he had never seen in a place he had never been. A wave of nausea and fear washed over him. What had he done? He looked down at Ranger, who looked back up at him, tail giving a slow, confident thump against the floor. For the first time in a decade, Michael Reynolds didn't know what tomorrow would bring. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt less like a threat and more like a possibility. The drive out of Portland was a slow exhale Michael hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. With each passing mile, the dense cityscape of concrete and steel gave way to towering Douglas firs in a sky that seemed to open up vast and gray. Ranger sat in the passenger seat of the newly purchased rust-pocked utility van, his nose pressed against the window, occasionally letting out a soft woof at a passing deer. The van was packed with the meager sum of Michael's worldly possessions: a footlocker, a duffel bag of clothes, a few tools, and a large bag of dog food. Michael followed the directions from a printed map, turning off the main highway onto smaller, winding roads. The air grew cooler, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. A fine mist, so common in this part of Oregon, began to fall, clinging to the windshield and blurring the edges of the world into a soft watercolor painting. As they drove, Michael's mind drifted to a time before the military, before the wars. He had grown up in rural Pennsylvania, the son of a farmer who worked the same fields his grandfather had tilled. Michael had once dreamed of a similar life: the rhythm of seasons, the satisfaction of working with his hands, the simple peace of a night sky unspoiled by city lights. But his father's farm had been lost to debt, and Michael had enlisted seeking structure and purpose. Now, decades later, he was returning to a version of that dream, though the circumstances were far from what he had imagined. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. It had been 18 hours since his last drink. The first tendrils of withdrawal were beginning to snake through his system. A thin sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead, despite the cool air coming through the cracked window. His stomach churned. He had experienced this before during half-hearted attempts to quit, but never had he committed to driving so far from the nearest liquor store. He gritted his teeth. This time would be different. It had to be. The small township of Pinecrest appeared briefly, a cluster of buildings that included a general store, a diner, a post office, and a handful of houses gathered around a crossroads. Michael slowed as he passed through, noting the curious glances from the few people on the street. In the window of the diner, an elderly man in overalls watched him pass, his gaze lingering with the frank appraisal of someone who rarely saw new faces. Michael's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. He pulled over and parked in front of the diner, a weathered wooden building with a sign that read "Faye's Home Cooking" in faded red letters. "Wait here, Scout," he said, giving the dog a reassuring pat. "I'll be quick." Inside the diner was warm and smelled of coffee and fried potatoes. A few customers sat at the counter, and their conversation died as Michael entered. He felt their eyes on him, not hostile, but wary, assessing. A middle-aged woman with copper-colored hair pulled back in a practical bun approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice neither friendly nor unfriendly. "Coffee and whatever sandwich is fastest," Michael replied. "To go, please." As she moved away to prepare his order, the hushed conversation resumed. Michael caught fragments: Lawson Farm and city folk and waste of money. He kept his eyes down, but his ears, trained by years in hostile territory, missed nothing. When the woman returned with a paper bag and a foam cup, her expression had softened slightly. "You bought the old Lawson place, didn't you?" she asked. Michael nodded, surprised. Word travels fast. Small town, she said with a shrug. I'm Fay Morgan. My family's been in Pinecrest for 4 generations. Michael Reynolds, he replied, offering his hand. She shook it, her grip firm. That place has been empty for nearly 30 years. Got quite a history. Oh, Michael found himself genuinely curious. Fay glanced at the other customers, then lowered her voice. Just a word of advice. Folks around here don't talk much about Lawson Farm, especially not around the Crawford family. They own half the valley, including the lumber mill, and most of the businesses in town. Why would they care about an old farm? That's a long story, Faye said, her ID shifting to the door as the bell chimed, announcing a new customer. Her expression changed, closing off. That'll be $7.50 for the food. Michael paid and took his food, sensing the sudden chill in the atmosphere. As he turned to leave, he nearly collided with a tall man in an expensive-looking hunting jacket. The man was perhaps 60, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent time outdoors. His eyes, a pale, icy blue, assessed Michael with immediate dislike. Pardon me, Michael said, stepping aside. The man didn't respond, just continued to stare at Michael with undisguised suspicion. The tension in the diner was palpable, conversations completely silenced. Michael left feeling the man's gaze boring into his back. When he climbed back into the van, Ranger greeted him with enthusiasm, oblivious to the strange encounter. Something tells me we're walking into more than we bargained for, boy, Michael murmured, offering half his sandwich to the eager dog. After another 20 minutes, he found the turnoff the map indicated. It was less a road and more a suggestion, a gap in the trees nearly swallowed by ferns and blackberry bushes. He eased the van through the opening, the branches scraping against the metal sides like skeletal fingers. The driveway was a long, rutted track of dirt and gravel. As he rounded a final bend, the house came into view. Michael's heart sank. The photograph online had been charitable. In reality, the house was a wreck, a testament to decades of neglect. It was a 2-story farmhouse that had once been painted white, but now the paint was a leprous patchwork of peeling flakes, revealing the weathered, silver-gray wood beneath. The front porch sagged at a dangerous angle, its railing splintered and broken. Several windows were shattered, their empty frames like vacant eyes, while others were boarded up haphazardly. The yard was a wild, untamed jungle of knee-high grass, thorny bushes, and determined weeds that crept up the sides of the house, as if trying to pull it back into the earth. "What have I done, Ranger?" Michael murmured, shutting off the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the gentle patter of mist on the roof. Ranger, however, did not share his dismay. The moment Michael opened the door, the German shepherd leaped out, his tail held high. He began exploring immediately, his nose to the ground, taking in the symphony of new smells with undisguised delight. He bounded through the tall grass, a flash of gray and white against the wild green. Watching him, a small corner of Michael's tension eased. He got out of the van, his worn work boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. He walked slowly toward the house, his gaze taking in the full scope of the decay. It was overwhelming. The task of making this place habitable seemed impossible, a fool's errand. And yet, as he stood there, a strange feeling began to settle over him. It was quiet, a deep, profound quiet he hadn't experienced in years. There were no sirens, no shouting from neighboring apartments, no rumble of traffic. There was only the sound of the wind whispering through the tall pines that ring the property. For the first time, the noise inside his head seemed to recede, pushed back by the immense peaceful silence of the place. Despite the ruin before him, he felt a flicker of something he had long thought dead: tranquility. He was so lost in the moment that he didn't hear the approaching vehicle until it was nearly upon them. An old, faded blue pickup truck, coughing and sputtering, rumbled up the driveway and parked next to his van. The driver's side door creaked open, and a small, wiry woman who looked to be in her late 70s emerged. She wore sturdy boots, denim jeans, and a thick flannel jacket. Her white hair was tied back in a practical bun, and her face was a roadmap of wrinkles that deepened when she smiled, which she did now. Her eyes were a bright, curious blue. Ranger trotted over, not with aggression, but with polite curiosity. He sniffed her offered hand and, seemingly satisfied, allowed her to scratch his head. "Well, now, he's a handsome one," the woman said, her voice clear and strong. "I saw the van turn in. Haven't seen anyone come up this driveway in years. Figured I should say hello. I'm Eleanor Wilson. I live just down the road a ways. Michael Reynolds, Michael replied, extending a hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. This is Ranger. Eleanor's gaze shifted from Michael to the dilapidated house, a knowing look in her eyes. She held up a basket she was carrying, a clean dish towel covering its contents. Brought you a little something. A welcome to the neighborhood, and I figured you wouldn't have a working kitchen in there for a while. That's very kind of you, Michael said, genuinely surprised by the gesture. Thank you. No trouble, she said, waving a dismissive hand. So you're the one who bought the old Lawson place. We all wondered who would be brave enough, or maybe foolish enough, to take it on. Lawson, Michael asked as he accepted the heavy warm basket. The smell of baked bread and savory herbs wafted up. That's right, belonged to Dr. Sarah Lawson. Eleanor explained, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. Brilliant woman, a botanist you know, knew more about the plants in this forest than anyone. She bought this place back in the 80s, fixed it up real nice, had the most amazing gardens. Eleanor gestured toward the overgrown wilderness of the yard. You wouldn't know it to look at it now. What happened to her? Michael asked, his curiosity piqued. Eleanor's smile faded completely. She lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. She disappeared about 30 years ago now, just vanished into thin air one day. Her car was still here after all her research, her clothes, everything. The police came, looked around for a bit, but never found a trace of her. It was the strangest thing. She leaned a little closer. Folks around here have their stories. Some say she just packed up and left, started a new life. But I never believed that. She loved this land too much. Others, she paused, her blue eyes locking with his. Others say her spirit never left. They say on quiet nights you can still see a light moving in the upstairs windows. Michael, a man who had faced horrors far more tangible than ghosts, simply nodded. He was too tired to entertain local legends, but the story of the brilliant doctor who vanished lingered in his mind. Well, Eleanor said, straightening up as if shaking off the somber memory, I'll let you get settled. If you need anything, a hand with something, or just a cup of coffee, my place is the one with the red mailbox about a mile back. Don't be a stranger. With a final pat for Ranger, she climbed back into her noisy truck and rumbled away, leaving Michael and his dog alone once more. The mist had thickened into a steady drizzle. Michael looked from the warm basket in his hands to the dark, silent windows of his new home. It wasn't just an abandoned house anymore. It was a house with echoes, a place holding a 30-year-old mystery. The first morning at the farm dawned cold and damp, a thick fog blanketing the valley, muffling the world in a shroud of gray and reducing the surrounding forest to a series of faint, ghostly silhouettes. For Michael, it was the first morning in years that he had woken up after having slept through the night. But the price was steep. His body denied the alcohol it had come to expect was rebelling. His hands shook violently. Cold sweat soaked through his shirt despite the chill in the air. Nausea twisted his gut into knots. He had slept in the back of the van, wrapped in a thick sleeping bag, with Ranger curled up at his feet, a warm, living weight that was both comforting and grounding. Now he sat on the van's rear bumper head in his hands, fighting the desperate craving that screamed through every cell in his body. One day at a time, he muttered through clenched teeth. 1 hour at a time. Ranger sat beside him, pressed against his leg, a silent support system. The dog's presence was the only thing keeping Michael from jumping back in the van and driving to the nearest liquor store. After what seemed like hours, the worst of the morning's withdrawal symptoms began to recede enough for him to function. He brewed coffee on a camp stove and forced himself to eat some of Eleanor's bread, knowing his body needed fuel even if his stomach protested. With grim determination, he surveyed the house in daylight. The damage was extensive, but not insurmountable. The basic structure appeared sound, the foundation solid. It was a battleground, and his newest enemy was decay. Drawing on a lifetime of naval discipline, he decided to tackle it with strategy. He would clear and secure one room at a time, creating a small island of order in the sea of chaos. He chose the room to the right of the main entryway, a space he assumed had been the study. Of all the rooms on the ground floor, this one felt the most personal, the most like the heart of the house. Sunlight, weak and filtered by the fog, struggled through the grimy window panes, illuminating swirling galaxies of dust motes. A massive oak desk stood against the far wall, its surface covered in a thick gray blanket of dust. Bookshelves lined another wall, many of their contents having tumbled to the floor, their pages swollen and warped by moisture. The air was thick with a scent of old paper, damp wood, and time itself. Armed with a heavy-duty trash bag, a broom, and a crowbar for stubborn debris, Michael set to work. He started by clearing the fallen books, handling them with a strange reverence. They were mostly scientific texts, books on botany, chemistry, and local ecology. Ranger explored the room with his nose sniffing every corner with intense interest, before finally settling on an old rug near the desk, watching his master with patient eyes. For the first hour, the only sounds were the scrape of the broom on the wooden floor and the rustle of debris filling the bag. Michael fell into a rhythm that mindless physical labor, a welcome distraction from the tremors still running through his hands. Then Ranger began to act strangely. It started with a low whine. Michael glanced over. The dog had gotten up from the rug and was sniffing intently at a section of floorboard in the corner just to the left of the heavy desk. His tail was low, giving a slow, uncertain wag. "What is it, boy, a mouse?" Michael asked, going back to his sweeping. But Ranger didn't stop. The sniffing became more frantic. He began to paw at the floorboard, his claws making a soft scratching sound on the old wood. The whine grew louder, more insistent. "Hey, leave it," Michael commanded, his voice firm. "There's enough here to fix without you tearing up the floor." Ranger paused, looked back at Michael with an almost pleading expression, and then returned to his task with even more determination. The pawing turned into digging, and a sharp, demanding bark echoed through the silent house. Michael stopped working, leaning on his broom. This was not normal behavior. Ranger was a disciplined dog, not prone to random mischief. This was focus. This was purpose. He had seen that same look in Ranger's eyes on training fields, a single-minded intensity that did not waver. Sighing, Michael walked over. All right, I'm coming. Show me what's so important." Ranger backed away slightly as Michael knelt, running his hand over the floorboards. They seemed solid, no different from the rest. But as he pressed down on the spot Ranger had indicated, he felt a faint give, a slight springiness that wasn't there in the adjacent planks. His curiosity finally overriding his skepticism, he went to retrieve the crowbar. He wedged the flat end of the tool into the thin gap between the boards and pushed. The old wood groaned in protest. With a final sharp crack, the board splintered and lifted. Ranger barked once more, a sound of triumph this time. Michael peered into the opening. Beneath the floor was not dirt and foundation, but a small, dark, man-made cavity, and nestled inside it, protected from the damp and the dust, was a plain rectangular tin box. His heart began to beat a little faster. He reached in and lifted it out. It was heavier than he expected, its surface cool to the touch. There was no lock, just a simple latch on the front. He sat back on his heels, the box resting on his knees, with Ranger nosing at it excitedly. For a moment he hesitated, feeling like an intruder prying into secrets that weren't his. But this was his house now. Its history, its echoes, its secrets. They were all his. He unfastened the latch and lifted the lid. Inside, protected by a layer of oilcloth, was a single object, a thick, leather-bound journal. He carefully lifted it out. The leather was soft and worn with use, and the pages were yellowed at the edges. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, elegant, and precise. "Property of Dr. Sarah Lawson," it read. He carried the journal over to the front steps of the house where the light was better and began to read. Ranger lay at his feet, resting his head on his paws as if his job was done. The early entries were filled with scientific passion and a deep love for the Oregon wilderness. Dr. Lawson wrote about her work, her dream of isolating a specific compound from a rare local species of fern she called the phantom fern. Her notes were detailed, filled with complex formulas and diagrams Michael couldn't fully comprehend, but he understood the goal. She believed this compound could halt and perhaps even reverse the devastating effects of Alzheimer's disease. Her writing was full of hope, the words of a brilliant mind on the verge of a breakthrough that could save thousands of lives. As Michael turned the pages, however, the tone began to shift. The hopeful scientific entries became interspersed with notes of caution and worry. About a year before her disappearance, the entries grew more infrequent, the handwriting slightly less steady. Then he reached the final few pages. The scientific notes were gone, replaced by short, fearful sentences. "He knows about my progress. His offer is an insult to the work, an insult to nature itself. He sees only profit, not people." Michael's blood ran cold. He read the next entry. "He visited again today unannounced. He is a man who is not used to being told no. He said I was being naive, that my discovery would mean nothing without his company's resources. It felt less like a statement and more like a threat. Then the very last entry, dated just 2 days before the date Eleanor had said she disappeared. I have to hide this. I have to hide everything. I fear what HC will do when he learns I will never sell. He is a man without a conscience. Michael stared at the two letters. HC. The quiet house suddenly felt different, the silence no longer peaceful but menacing. Ranger had not just found a dusty old journal. He had uncovered a secret that 30 years ago might have been worth killing for. Michael spent the rest of the day in a state of restless contemplation. The journal, now hidden in his footlocker, had transformed his simple renovation project into something far more complex. He found himself staring at shadows, listening to the old house creak and settle, wondering what other secrets it might hold. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of lavender and deep blue, Michael sat on the porch nursing a cup of instant coffee. His body still ached for alcohol, but the discovery of the journal had given him something else to focus on, a distraction from the craving that had become his constant companion. Ranger lay beside him, alert but relaxed, occasionally raising his head at the rustle of a small animal in the underbrush. The sound of tires on gravel announced another visitor. A well-maintained pickup truck, newer than Eleanor's, pulled up. A man in his early 60s climbed out. He was about Michael's height, with a solid, sturdy build that spoke of a life of physical work. He had a thick head of gray hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and calm, observant hazel eyes. He wore a clean work shirt, durable canvas pants, and steel-toed boots. He moved with a quiet confidence, his hands resting easily at his sides. Ranger, who had been watching the visitor from a safe distance, let out a single low bark. The man stopped, holding up a hand in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, big fella," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. "I'm not here to cause trouble." He looked at Michael. "Saw you from the road. Name's James Hartman. I live a couple miles west of here. Retired carpenter." Michael stood, offering his hand. Michael Reynolds. James's handshake was firm, the handshake of a man who had spent his life gripping tools. "Eleanor mentioned you'd bought the old Lawson place. Thought I'd stop by, see if you need a hand. That porch is about to give way completely." Michael followed James's gaze to the sagging porch. "I'll get to it eventually." James shook his head. "That beam's about to go. You keep walking on it like that, and you're going to bring the whole roof down on your head." Michael bristled, his ingrained self-reliance and distrust of strangers immediately kicking in. "I've got it handled." James didn't seem offended. He simply walked a little closer, his expert eyes scanning the structure. "That's black rot. It's eaten clear through the post, and it's probably in the joist too. You can't just prop it up. You need to brace the roof properly first, then cut out and replace the whole corner section." James's assessment was calm, professional, and undeniably correct. It only made Michael more defensive. He felt exposed, his incompetence laid bare. "Thanks for the advice," he said, turning away, "but I don't need any help." James was quiet for a long moment. Michael could feel the man's steady gaze on his back. "Listen," James said finally, his voice losing none of its calm. "I'm not looking for work. I've got more than enough projects of my own, but I also don't want to see my new neighbor get himself killed on his first week here. I've got the tools and the lumber in my truck. Let me help you brace it. It's the neighborly thing to do." Michael stopped, his hand hovering over his coffee cup. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse to send this stranger on his way. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat. It was a weakness he had never allowed himself. He looked at the rotting beam, at the precarious angle of the porch roof, and then at his own two hands, which were not enough for this fight. He thought of Ranger, who depended on him entirely. Getting crushed under his own porch wouldn't do either of them any good. Swallowing his pride was a bitter pill, but it was necessary. He let out a slow breath and turned to face James, giving a short, grudging nod. "All right, what do you need me to do?" A faint, understanding smile touched James's lips. "Good. Let's get to work." The next few hours were a blur of focused activity. James was a master of his craft, directing Michael with clear, concise instructions. They built temporary supports, carefully transferring the weight of the roof off the compromised corner. There was little talk, just the companionable sounds of saws, drills, and hammers. Michael, used to the clear chain of command and shared purpose of the military, found himself falling into an easy rhythm with the other man. James didn't pry or ask personal questions. He simply worked his competence, a quiet, reassuring presence. As they were measuring a replacement beam, James paused and looked at the intricate woodwork along the edge of the roof. She always did have an eye for detail, he murmured, almost to himself. She, Michael asked. Dr. Lawson, James clarified. I did some work for her when she first moved in. Built her bookshelves, repaired some of these windows. She was a good woman to work for, paid fairly, and always had a cold glass of lemonade waiting. Very smart, very dedicated to her work. He shook his head slightly. It was a real shame what happened. James's words added another dimension to the woman in the journal. She wasn't just a victim or a ghost story anymore. She was a person who had hired a local carpenter who had an eye for detail who served lemonade on a hot day. The mystery deepened, and for the first time Michael felt a connection to her, a sense of shared tenderness across time. By late afternoon, the porch was stabilized, the rotten wood cut away, and a new solid corner post securely in place. It wasn't finished, but it was safe. The two men stood back, covered in sawdust and sweat, looking at their handiwork. It's a start, James said with satisfaction. I couldn't have done it without you. Michael admitted the words, feeling strange but right. Thank you, James. Like I said, just being neighborly, James replied, already packing his tools. You've got a long road ahead of you with this place. Don't be too proud to ask for help. As James's truck disappeared down the driveway, Michael remained on the porch, running his hand over the new sturdy beam. Ranger came and sat beside him, leaning his weight against Michael's leg. The air was growing cool as the evening approached. He looked at the solid porch, at his loyal dog, and thought of the quiet, capable man who had asked for nothing in return. For the first time in a very, very long time, Michael Reynolds didn't feel completely alone. But as the shadows lengthened across the yard, his thoughts returned to the journal hidden in his footlocker. The initials HC nagged at him. There was a story here, a dark one, and somehow he had stumbled right into the middle of it. The initials HC were a splinter in Michael's mind. For 2 days, he tried to ignore them, focusing on the practical backbreaking work of clearing the yard and patching a leak in the roof. But the name haunted the quiet moments, a ghost more real than any local legend. The tremors in his hands had subsided slightly, but the craving for alcohol remained a constant gnawing presence. Each morning began with a battle, his body demanding the poison his mind was determined to refuse. The work helped physical exhaustion sometimes dampen the worst of the withdrawal symptoms, but the nights were hard, filled with cold sweats and nightmares that left him gasping for breath. On the third morning, he woke from a fitful sleep to find Ranger standing alert at the van's back doors, growling softly. Outside, a fine mist shrouded the property, but through it, Michael could make out a dark SUV parked at the end of his driveway. As he watched, the vehicle's engine started, and it pulled away, disappearing into the fog. He was a man trained to assess threats and to gather intelligence before acting. He couldn't move forward without knowing who he was up against. The isolation of the farm, once a comfort, now felt like a liability. He needed information. He left Ranger on the newly secured porch with a fresh bowl of water and a command to stay. A command the dog obeyed with a soft whine of reluctance. Michael drove the van into Pinecrest parking in front of the small public library, a modest brick building sandwiched between the post office and a hardware store. Inside, the library was cool and quiet, smelling of old books and floor polish. A few elderly patrons browsed the shelves, and a middle-aged librarian with cat-eye glasses looked up from her desk as Michael entered. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to use a computer," Michael replied. She pointed to a small alcove where 2 outdated desktop computers sat. 30 minutes per person. Password is on the monitor. Michael nodded his thanks and made his way to the alcove. Sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair, he felt conspicuous in his worn flannel shirt and jeans, a rough-hewn figure in a world of digital information. He started his search, broadly typing in Alzheimer's disease research, 1985 to 1990, pharmaceutical companies, Oregon. The search yielded a torrent of scientific papers and articles. He patiently sifted through them, his eyes scanning for anything connected to the Pacific Northwest. After an hour, the librarian had either forgotten or ignored the 30-minute rule. He found a series of financial news articles about a promising, aggressive company called Crawford Biotech. In the late 80s, they had poured millions into developing a revolutionary treatment for Alzheimer's disease. His pulse quickened. He clicked on an article profiling the company's CEO. A picture loaded onto the screen showing a man in an expensive suit, younger, then with dark, slicked-back hair and a smile that was all confidence and sharp edges. His name was Harrison Crawford. HC. Michael felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He kept digging. He found article after article detailing Crawford Biotech's spectacular public failure. After bold predictions and a soaring stock price, their clinical trials had collapsed. The drug was ineffective and had dangerous side effects. The news had sent their stock plummeting, wiping out fortunes and deeply humiliating its proud CEO. The timeline was a perfect match. Crawford's public failure occurred just months before the threats began appearing in Dr. Lawson's journal. It was all there. The motive was as clear as day. Harrison Crawford was a man who had failed, and it appeared he had found someone to blame, or rather, someone from whom he could steal a success. Michael printed a few of the key articles, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled the warm pages from the printer. This wasn't a ghost story. This was a story about greed, power, and a rich man who did not like to lose. As he was leaving, he paused at the librarian's desk. "Excuse me, I'm new in town. What can you tell me about the Crawford family?" The woman's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "The Crawfords own Crawford Biotech. They're the largest employer in the county. Mr. Crawford's father started the company in the 50s, but it was Harrison who really built it into what it is today. They still live around here. The main estate is about 20 miles north, but they own property all over the valley, including the lumber mill." She leaned forward slightly. "You're the one who bought the old Lawson place, aren't you?" Michael nodded. The librarian glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Word of advice, don't ask too many questions about Dr. Lawson, especially not around the Crawfords or Sheriff Bailey. Some stories are better left buried." Michael thanked her and left the warning settling like a cold weight in his gut. He drove back to the farm with the name Harrison Crawford echoing in his head. The weight of the discovery was immense. He was no longer just a man fixing a house. He was the custodian of a secret that had gotten a brilliant woman killed, a secret involving a man who was now one of the most powerful figures in the county. Back at the farm, the afternoon sun was warm, filtering through the tall pines. He let Ranger out for a run, needing a moment to clear his head. He watched the dog bound through the meadow behind the house, a picture of pure, uncomplicated joy. But then Ranger's demeanor changed abruptly. He stopped mid-stride, his head raised, his nose twitching as he tested the air. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Before Michael could call him back, Ranger took off. He didn't run playfully, but with the focused, driving speed of a predator on a scent. He veered away from the meadow and plunged deep into the dense old-growth forest that bordered the property. "Ranger, heel!" Michael shouted, his voice sharp with command. The dog ignored him, disappearing into the shadows of the ancient trees. Cursing under his breath, Michael took off after him. He ran through the thick undergrowth branches, whipping at his face, his heart pounding with a mix of annoyance and fear. He could hear Ranger's frantic barking up ahead, a beacon guiding him deeper into the woods. He finally burst into a small, secluded clearing, dominated by a thick, gnarled thicket of wild ivy and blackberry bushes that had grown into an impenetrable wall of green. Ranger was at the base of it, digging furiously, sending dirt and leaves flying. He was barking without pause, his entire body trembling with intensity. "What in the world have you found now?" Michael panted, trying to catch his breath. He grabbed Ranger's collar, but the dog was single-minded, straining against his grip to get back to his digging. Michael looked closer at the spot. It was just a mound of earth and vines, no different from the rest of the forest floor. But Ranger's certainty was infectious. Trusting the dog's instincts, which had already proven sharper than his own, Michael began to tear at the thick vines, his hands quickly becoming scratched and raw. He pulled away layers of tangled green, clearing away decades of overgrowth. After several minutes of hard work, his fingers brushed against something cold, hard and unnatural metal. He worked faster, his adrenaline surging. He tore away the last of the covering and stared in disbelief. Hidden beneath the mound, flush with the earth and almost perfectly camouflaged, was a heavy rectangular steel door with a rusted iron handle. A cellar door in the middle of the woods far from the house. It took all of Michael's strength to pull it open. The hinges screamed in protest and the door lifted with a groan, revealing a set of steep concrete steps leading down into darkness. A cool, musty but clean smell, like a wine cellar, wafted up. He took a flashlight from his pocket and aimed its beam into the depths. The light revealed a small, windowless room, but it was no cellar. It was a laboratory, Unlike the house, this place was pristine, a time capsule sealed away from the elements. Stainless steel counters lined one wall holding beakers, microscopes, and complex scientific equipment that gleamed in the flashlight's beam. Shelves on the other wall were filled with neatly labeled jars of dried plants and glass vials of liquid. Charts and molecular diagrams were pinned to a large corkboard, and on a central workbench sat a stack of thick, meticulously organized binders. Michael descended the steps, Ranger close at his heels. He walked over to the workbench and opened the top binder. The pages were filled with the same neat, precise handwriting from the journal. But this wasn't a journal. This was the work itself. The complete, unadulterated research with detailed experimental data, documented results, and the final perfected formula for the compound derived from the phantom fern. He stood there in the silent, subterranean lab, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the life's work of Dr. Sarah Lawson. This was it. This was the treasure Harrison Crawford had been after. This was the secret she had died to protect. And now he was the one standing guard. A chill ran down Michael's spine that had nothing to do with the cool air of the underground chamber. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was a scientific breakthrough worth billions of dollars hidden away for 3 decades. He carefully began to examine the binders, trying to make sense of the complex formulas and chemical diagrams. Though much of it was beyond his understanding, he could grasp the basics. Dr. Lawson had isolated a compound from the phantom fern that showed remarkable ability to repair damaged neural pathways, the very pathways that Alzheimer's disease destroyed. Her notes detailed successful trials with lab mice, showing not just prevention, but actual reversal of symptoms. On a small shelf near the workbench, Michael found a series of carefully preserved specimen jars, each containing pressed samples of a delicate, almost translucent fern. It had an otherworldly quality, its fronds so pale they seemed to glow in the beam of his flashlight. "The phantom fern," he murmured to Ranger, who was sniffing curiously at the base of the shelves. He continued his exploration, finding a small refrigeration unit still humming quietly in the corner, powered by what appeared to be a sophisticated solar battery system. Inside were dozens of vials containing clear liquid, preserved samples of the compound itself. Michael examined the system more closely, realizing it wasn't just powered by solar energy. There were fresh batteries dating back only a year and signs of regular maintenance. Someone had been caring for this place, ensuring the samples remained viable. But who and why hadn't they come forward with Dr. Lawson's research? As Michael examined the lab more closely, he noticed something else. The entire facility had been designed to remain hidden and protected. The walls were reinforced concrete, the ceiling lined with waterproof material. The ventilation system was cleverly disguised as old tree roots penetrating the ceiling. The door was made of heavy steel with a sophisticated locking mechanism that had only rusted due to 3 decades of disuse. This wasn't a hasty hiding place. This was a fortress built to protect a legacy. After several hours of careful examination, Michael gathered a few of the most important binders in one sample jar containing the phantom fern. He couldn't risk carrying all of the research back to the house at once, but he needed to study it more carefully to understand exactly what he had found. Before leaving, he made sure everything was as he had found it, then carefully closed and concealed the door, piling branches and leaves over it as it had been. As they made their way back through the forest, Ranger trotting proudly beside him, Michael felt the weight of the binders in his backpack like a physical manifestation of the responsibility he had just inherited. Sleep did not come easily to Michael that night. The discovery in the hidden lab had changed everything. He sat late into the night at the dusty dining table, a single battery-powered lantern, casting a pool of light reading Dr. Lawson's work, page by page. The sheer brilliance of her research was staggering, a symphony of chemistry and botany that he could only partially grasp. But he understood the conclusion. She had found a cure. Before dawn, he carefully hid the binders in his footlocker and tried to get a few hours of rest, but his mind was racing. What was he supposed to do with this information? Go to the police, the same police who had barely investigated a woman's disappearance 30 years ago, in a town where the Crawford family seemed to hold all the power. Next morning, Michael resumed work on the house, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. He spent the day clearing debris from the kitchen, but his thoughts kept drifting to the hidden lab and its secrets. A knot of paranoia had taken root in his gut. The quiet of the farm no longer felt entirely peaceful. It felt watchful. He was a soldier again on guard duty in hostile territory. Late in the afternoon, as Michael was carrying a load of trash to his makeshift burn pile, he noticed something odd. Ranger, who had been exploring the yard, suddenly froze. His ears perked forward, his body tense. Michael followed the dog's gaze and caught a brief flash of movement at the edge of the forest. Just a shadow there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it, but Ranger's reaction told him it was real. Someone was watching the farm. Michael casually dropped the trash bag and walked toward the house, keeping his movements relaxed and unaware. Once inside, he positioned himself at a window where he could observe the tree line without being seen. For nearly an hour, he saw nothing. Then, just as the sun was beginning to set, he caught a glint of light reflecting off glass, probably binoculars or a camera lens deep in the shadows of the pines. His military training kicked in. Someone was conducting surveillance on his property. They were being careful, professional even, but not careful enough to fool a man who had spent years in war zones or a dog with Ranger's keen senses. Michael spent the night on high alert, checking windows, listening for unusual sounds. He kept Ranger close, knowing the dog's senses were sharper than his own, but whoever had been watching did not approach the house. By morning, Michael was exhausted but resolute. He needed more information, and he needed allies. He decided to visit Eleanor Wilson. Her knowledge of the area and its history might provide insights he couldn't get elsewhere. After securing the house and making sure Ranger had food and water, Michael drove the short distance to Eleanor's property, a neat, well-maintained farmhouse with the red mailbox she had mentioned. Eleanor was in her garden, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and gloves, kneeling beside a row of tomato plants. She looked up as Michael's van pulled in, a smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "Michael Reynolds," she said, getting to her feet with the careful movements of someone managing arthritic joints. "I was wondering when you'd come calling. How's that old house treating you?" "It's a challenge," Michael admitted, "but I'm making progress." Eleanor nodded. "Come inside, I've just made lemonade." Her kitchen was warm and inviting, smelling of fresh bread and herbs. The lemonade was cold and tart, served in heavy glass tumblers that looked decades old. They sat at a round oak table by a window overlooking the garden. "I expect you have questions," Eleanor said, her blue eyes sharp and knowing. Michael nodded. "About Dr. Lawson and the Crawfords." Eleanor's expression grew serious. "I figured as much. What have you found?" Michael hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Some of her journals, and I know she was working on something important, a treatment for Alzheimer's, something Harrison Crawford wanted badly." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, studying Michael with an intensity that belied her age. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. "Sarah Lawson was my sister," she said quietly. "One of the finest people I have ever known. Brilliant, of course, but also kind-principled. She came here to study the plants in our forests, plants that grow nowhere else in the world. She believed nature had already created the cures for our worst diseases. We just had to learn how to listen." Eleanor took a sip of her lemonade, her gaze drifting to the window. The phantom fern was her obsession, a rare species that only grows in the deepest, oldest parts of these forests. Most people never even see it. But Sarah found it, and she discovered something in it, something miraculous. She looked back at Michael. A compound that could actually repair damaged brain cells. Not just slow the progression of Alzheimer's, but reverse it. "And Crawford wanted it," Michael said. Eleanor nodded, her expression darkening. Harrison Crawford was already a powerful man, but he wanted more. His company had spent millions developing their own Alzheimer's drug, only to have it fail spectacularly in trials. When he learned about Sarah's research, he saw a way to recoup his losses and save his reputation. He offered to buy her research. At first, Yes offered her a fortune, but Sarah refused. She didn't trust him to make the treatment available to everyone who needed it. She knew he'd patent it, price it out of reach for ordinary people. They argued about it for months. Eleanor's voice dropped lower. Then the threats began. Strange men watching the farm. Vandalism. Her car was tampered with. The local sheriff in Crawford's pocket, of course, dismissed her concerns. "And then she vanished," Michael said quietly. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. One day she was just gone. The police made a show of investigating, but it was all for appearance. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one could prove anything. The Crawfords own this valley, you see. They own the police, the courts, the newspapers. They even tried to buy the farm after Sarah disappeared, but her will had left it to a conservation trust. It's been tied up in legal battles for decades, which is why it ended up in that county auction. Michael felt a chill. And now I own it. Yes, Eleanor said, reaching across the table to pat his hand. And I think that terrifies them. They've spent 30 years trying to find Sarah's research. They tore that house apart looking for it. They've had the property watched all these years, making sure no one got too curious. And now you show up a stranger, an outsider living in that house. I saw someone watching yesterday, Michael admitted. Eleanor didn't seem surprised. They'll be watching to see if you find anything. And if they think you have, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Why are you telling me all this? Michael asked. Because someone needs to know the truth, Eleanor said firmly. I'm an old woman. I've kept Sarah's secret for 30 years. But I won't live forever. Someone needs to carry on to make sure her work isn't lost or worse, stolen by the people who killed her. Michael sat back, the weight of her words settling on him. You think her research is still out there somewhere? Eleanor's gaze was steady. I know Sarah. She would have protected it, hidden it where they couldn't find it. She was always thinking ahead. Michael didn't mention the hidden lab, not yet. He needed to be certain of Eleanor's trustworthiness, though his instincts told him she was genuine. There's something else you should know, Eleanor continued. The Crawfords are making another push to develop an Alzheimer's drug. It's all over the local paper. They've announced a major breakthrough with clinical trials starting soon. After 30 years of failure, suddenly they have something promising. Her eyes narrowed. Convenient timing, don't you think? Michael felt a surge of anger. You think they finally found her formula? Or part of it, Eleanor said. But maybe not all. Maybe that's why they're still watching the farm. As Michael drove back to the farm, his mind was racing. Eleanor's story had confirmed his worst suspicions. The Crawfords had almost certainly murdered Dr. Lawson, and now they were preparing to profit from her stolen research. But they didn't have everything. The hidden lab proved that. Dr. Lawson had been clever enough to create a secure location for her most important work, somewhere the Crawfords had never found, despite decades of searching. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed it, a black SUV parked on the side of the road about half a mile from his turnoff. As he passed, he caught a glimpse of a man inside pretending to read a map, but clearly tracking Michael's van with his eyes. Surveillance professional and persistent. Michael didn't turn his head or give any indication he had noticed. He continued driving, normally turned onto his driveway and parked in front of the house. Ranger greeted him with enthusiasm, showing no signs of distress, which meant no one had approached the house while Michael was gone. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the hidden lab, about the Crawfords, about Dr. Lawson's fate. He had stumbled into a decades-old murder case, and the killers were still at large, still powerful, and now aware of his presence. He needed to be prepared. The next morning, Michael filled Ranger's water bowl from a jug he brought from town. As he set it down on the kitchen floor, Ranger approached, sniffed at the water, then suddenly recoiled with a disgusted snort. He backed away as if the bowl contained a snake, then looked up at Michael and let out a single sharp bark. What's wrong with it? It's just water, Michael said, puzzled. He turned on the tap he had recently connected to the well, intending to fill the bowl again. Ranger's reaction was immediate and frantic. He began barking loudly, a series of urgent, high-pitched alarms. He pushed his head between Michael and the sink, physically blocking him from the stream of water. Ranger, what has gotten into you? Michael said, pushing the dog gently aside. Ranger refused to be moved. He barked again, this time with a note of desperation that chilled Michael to the bone. This was not a game. This was a serious warning. Trust the dog. The thought was immediate and absolute. Michael shut off the tap and looked at the bowl of water on the floor. It looked clear. It looked normal, but Ranger would not go near it. His stomach clenched. He walked out the back door and headed directly for the old stone well that served as the farm's only water source. As he got closer, he noticed something was wrong. The heavy circular wooden cover, which he knew he had seated firmly the day before, was slightly ajar, shifted just an inch. He lifted it off. An acrid, faintly oily chemical smell immediately hit him, burning his nostrils. It was not the clean, earthy scent of fresh well water. It was the smell of poison. Someone had come onto his property in the dead of night, and deliberately contaminated his water supply. If it weren't for Ranger, he would have been drinking it, making coffee with it. The thought sent a wave of cold fury through him. This was no longer just surveillance. This was a direct attack. Michael spent the rest of the day hauling bottled water from his van, his mind racing. This was a clear escalation from a veiled threat to a potentially lethal attack. They weren't just trying to scare him off anymore. He decided to report the incident, though he had little hope of an official response. He drove to the Pinecrest Sheriff's Office, a small brick building next to the town's single traffic light. Inside, a bored-looking deputy sat at a desk, flipping through a magazine. "Can I help you?" the deputy asked, not bothering to stand. "I need to report a trespasser," Michael said. "Someone tampered with my well." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Name and address." Michael Reynolds, Lawson Farm. At the mention of the farm, a flicker of recognition crossed the deputy's face. He set down his magazine. "Wait here." A few minutes later, a heavy-set man in his late 50s emerged from a back office. He had a drooping mustache and a perpetually bored expression, as if every call was an interruption to his eventual retirement. "Sheriff Victor Bailey," he said, offering a limp handshake. "You're the new owner of the old Lawson place." "That's right," Michael said. "Someone trespassed on my property last night and contaminated my well with some kind of chemical." Sheriff Bailey's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation. What makes you think someone tampered with your well?" Michael explained about the displaced cover, the chemical smell, and Ranger's reaction. As he spoke, he noticed the sheriff's eyes taking on a dismissive glaze. "Probably just some local kids playing a prank," Bailey said when Michael finished. "Dumping something they shouldn't have. Happens sometimes." "This wasn't a prank," Michael insisted. "Someone deliberately poisoned my water supply." Bailey sighed, rubbing his chin. "Look, Mr. Reynolds, you're new here. You buy a rundown place like that, sometimes you get a little trouble from local vandals. It's petty stuff. I'll file a report, but honestly, there's not much to go on. No suspects, no witnesses." "I want the water tested," Michael said. "If there's a dangerous chemical in there." "County doesn't have the budget for that kind of thing without solid evidence of a crime," Bailey interrupted. "My advice, clean out your well, get a better lock for your gate, and keep an eye out for teenagers." It was clear the sheriff had no intention of taking the complaint seriously. Michael left the station feeling frustrated, but not surprised. Eleanor had warned him the local authorities were in the Crawfords' pocket. As he was walking to his van, a sleek black sedan pulled up beside him. The passenger window slid down silently, revealing a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. He had sharp features, cold gray eyes, and the polished appearance of corporate wealth. "Mr. Reynolds," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "Alexander Moore. I represent Silver Ridge Development. Do you have a moment to talk?" Michael hesitated, then nodded, his senses on high alert. Moore gestured to the passenger seat, but Michael remained standing on the sidewalk. Moore smiled thinly, accepting the rejection. "I'll be direct, Mr. Reynolds. My clients have a significant interest in properties in the Pinecrest Valley area, particularly historic sites like Lawson Farm. I've been authorized to offer you $750,000 for the property as is. Cash transaction. We handle all the paperwork, and it can be in your account by the end of the week." The number hung in the air, stunning Michael into silence. $750,000. It was more money than he had ever seen. It was enough to buy a proper house, a new truck enough to live on for years. It was an escape hatch, a golden ticket out of the mess he had stumbled into. For a fleeting second, he was tempted. He could take the money, disappear, and let this dangerous secret remain buried. But then he thought of Ranger saving him from the poisoned water, of Eleanor's tearful recounting of her sister's disappearance, of the brilliant woman who had given her life to protect research that could help millions. "The answer is no," Michael said, his voice quiet but firm. "The farm is not for sale." For the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed Moore's smooth features. "Mr. Reynolds, perhaps you don't appreciate the generosity of this offer. An opportunity like this is unlikely to present itself again." "I'll take my chances," Michael replied, standing up straight, shoulders back, the posture of a man who had faced down worse threats than a corporate lawyer. Moore stared at him for a long, calculating moment. The mask of politeness slipped away entirely. The smile vanished and his eyes became as hard and cold as river stones. "This property has a complicated history, Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice now laced with ice. "My clients have an interest in seeing that history remain undisturbed. Some things are better left buried in the past." The veiled threat hung in the quiet air. It would be a shame if someone were to stir up trouble for themselves by digging where they shouldn't. Moore handed Michael a business card. "When you reconsider, and you will call me. The offer has an expiration date." The window slid up, and the black sedan pulled away smoothly, leaving Michael standing on the sidewalk, the card clutched in his hand. The encounter with Moore had confirmed what Michael already suspected. The Crawfords were getting nervous. They knew about the journal he had found, perhaps had been watching when Ranger discovered it. But they didn't know about the hidden lab. If they did, they wouldn't be offering to buy the farm. They would be tearing it apart. That night, Michael sat on his porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, Ranger at his feet. The stars were brilliant in the clear country sky, a sight so rare in the city that it still took his breath away. But he couldn't enjoy it. His mind was consumed with the day's events, the poisoned well, the dismissive sheriff, the offer to buy the farm, the threats. He was in danger, and he knew it. The question was, what should he do next? A soft crunch of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Michael tensed his hand, automatically reaching for the shotgun he had propped against the wall beside him. Ranger stood alert but not aggressive, his tail giving a cautious wag. Headlights swept across the yard, and Michael recognized James's pickup truck. He relaxed slightly but kept the shotgun within reach. James stepped out, carrying a toolbox and what looked like a water testing kit. He approached the porch, his expression grim. "Eleanor called me," he said without preamble. "Said you might need some help." Michael eyed the water testing kit. "You heard about the well," James nodded. "News travels fast. Thought you might want to know what exactly they put in there." "Sheriff wouldn't test it," Michael said. James snorted. "Of course not. Bailey's been in Crawford's pocket for 20 years. He set the kit on the porch. "I was a water quality inspector before I retired to carpentry. Still have the equipment." Michael felt a surge of gratitude. "Thanks, James. I appreciate it." "Don't thank me yet. Let's see what we're dealing with." They walked to the well together, flashlights illuminating the path. James took samples of the water, working methodically, his experienced hands moving through the testing procedures with practiced ease. "Chemical herbicide," he announced after several minutes. "Industrial strength, the kind they use to clear land for development. Enough of this would make you very sick. Maybe worse." Michael felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his chest. "Definitely not kids playing a prank." "Definitely not," James agreed, packing up his equipment. "This is serious, Michael. These people don't mess around." "I'm starting to realize that," Michael said. Back on the porch, James hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "You found something, didn't you? Something they want." Michael studied the older man's face, looking for any sign of deception. He saw only concern and a weary kind of resignation. "What do you know about all this, James?" James sighed, sitting down on the porch steps. "I knew Sarah Lawson not just as a client. We were friends. I helped her build that lab in the woods." Michael felt a jolt of surprise. "You know about the lab," James nodded. "I helped design it. Hidden entrance, reinforced walls, self-sustaining power system. It was my best work, and no one ever knew about it." He looked up at Michael. "Except you, apparently." "Ranger found it," Michael admitted. "The research is still there. All of it perfectly preserved." James closed his eyes briefly, a look of profound relief crossing his face. "Thank God. Sarah always said if anything happened to her, the lab would protect her legacy until the right person came along." He looked at Michael with new intensity. "I guess that's you." "I don't know about that," Michael said. "I'm just a broken-down ex-SEAL who bought a farm." "Maybe that's exactly what was needed," James replied. "Someone with training, someone who can't be easily intimidated. Someone from outside who doesn't fear the Crawford name." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. "What did you find in there?" James finally asked. Michael described the lab, the research binders, the preserved samples of the phantom fern, and the compound Dr. Lawson had derived from it. "She did it," James murmured. "She actually found the cure." "And the Crawfords killed her for it," Michael said. James's expression darkened. "I believe they did. I was out of town when she disappeared. By the time I got back, the official story was already set. She'd run off, abandoned her research. But I knew better. Sarah would never have left her work unfinished. And now they're about to release a new Alzheimer's drug, Michael said, after 30 years of failure. They found part of her research, James said. Enough to create something, but not the complete formula. That's why they're still after the farm. They know there's more. Michael's mind was racing. I need to document everything in that lab. Get evidence of what they've stolen. And then what? James asked. The local authorities won't help you. The Crawfords own half the judges in the state. Then I go higher, Michael said firmly. FBI federal prosecutors. James looked skeptical. You'd be going up against one of the most powerful families in Oregon. They've buried this for 30 years. Which means the statute of limitations on murder hasn't expired, Michael pointed out. With the right evidence, they could still be prosecuted. James considered this, then nodded slowly. You'll need proof beyond the research. Something that directly ties the Crawfords to Sarah's disappearance. One step at a time, Michael said. First, I need to secure the lab and its contents. The Crawfords are escalating. The poisoned well, the offer to buy the farm, the threats. They're getting desperate. And desperate people are dangerous, James warned. You need to be careful, Michael. After James left, Michael couldn't sleep. The stakes had just been raised significantly. He wasn't just protecting an old house anymore. He was gathering evidence for a murder case against one of the most powerful families in the state. He spent the next day reinforcing the house's security as best he could with limited resources. Boarding up broken windows, adding padlocks to doors, creating makeshift alarms with fishing line and tin cans. It wasn't much, but it might give him warning if someone tried to break in. In the afternoon, he returned to the hidden lab, bringing a digital camera he had purchased in town. He meticulously photographed every page of the research binders, every sample jar, every diagram on the walls. It took hours, but when he was done, he had a complete digital record of Dr. Lawson's work. As he was finishing, Ranger, who had been patiently lying near the entrance, suddenly stood ears forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Michael immediately turned off his flashlight, plunging the lab into darkness. He moved silently to the steps, listening intently. At first he heard nothing. Then faintly the sound of voices drifted down from above. At least two men speaking in hushed tones. It must be around here somewhere. The dog led him this way yesterday. Crawford's getting impatient. If Hayes found something, we need to keep looking. Check every inch of these woods if we have to. Michael remained perfectly still, barely breathing. Ranger stood beside him, tense but silent, trained not to bark without command. They were searching for the lab. The voices grew fainter, moving away from the hidden entrance. Michael waited a full 30 minutes before daring to move. When he finally ascended the steps and peered out, the forest was quiet, no sign of the searchers. He carefully secured the lab door and recamouflaged it, then took a circuitous route back to the house, moving silently through the underbrush as he had been trained to do in the military. The encounter in the woods confirmed his fears. The Crawfords were actively searching for the lab. It was only a matter of time before they found it. He needed to act quickly. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in, bringing heavy rain and wind that rattled the old farmhouse. Michael sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the digital photos of Dr. Lawson's research on his laptop. The more he studied it, the more he understood the true magnitude of her discovery. This wasn't just an incremental advance in Alzheimer's treatment. It was a fundamental breakthrough that could change millions of lives. A flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. Ranger, lying at Michael's feet, suddenly raised his head, ears perked forward. Then the power went out. Michael wasn't surprised. The farmhouse's electrical connection was tenuous at best. He reached for the flashlight he kept nearby and switched it on. A knock at the front door made him freeze. Ranger was on his feet instantly. Hackles raised a low growl rumbling in his throat. Michael moved cautiously to the window, staying to one side to avoid being silhouetted. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could make out a figure on the porch. A woman, her hair plastered to her head by the downpour. "Mr. Reynolds," she called, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It's Lisa Wilson, Eleanor's niece." Michael hesitated, suspicious of any unexpected visitor, especially on a night like this. But Ranger's demeanor had changed. The growl had stopped, replaced by a curious tilt of the head. Keeping the shotgun close, Michael opened the door a crack. The woman on the porch was in her early 40s, with the same bright blue eyes as Eleanor, though her hair was dark rather than white. She was soaked through her rain jacket, doing little to keep out the deluge. "My aunt sent me," she said, shivering slightly. "She's worried. There are men watching your house from the road." Michael opened the door wider, allowing her to step inside. "How many?" "Two that I could see in a black SUV about half a mile down the road." She pushed wet hair from her face. "I'm a nurse at Pinecrest Medical Center. I was coming off shift when Aunt Eleanor called me. She said I should warn you." Michael offered her a towel, which she accepted gratefully. "Thank you for coming on all this way." "Aunt Eleanor doesn't get worked up over nothing," Lisa said, drying her hair. "If she's worried about you, there's good reason." "You know about the history here?" Michael asked, watching her carefully. Lisa's expression darkened. "I know Dr. Lawson disappeared under suspicious circumstances. I know the Crawfords were involved. I know my aunt has carried that knowledge for 30 years. She met Michael's gaze directly. "And I know they poisoned your well yesterday." "Word travels fast," Michael commented. "Small town," Lisa said with a shrug that reminded him of Eleanor. "Aunt Eleanor said you found something." "Something important." Michael didn't immediately respond, still wary of revealing too much. Lisa seemed to sense his hesitation. "I'm not here to pry, Mr. Reynolds. I'm here to help. The Crawfords have ruled this valley through fear for decades. It's time someone stood up to them." "Why now?" Michael asked. "Why me?" Lisa's eyes showed a flash of old pain. "Because Dr. Lawson wasn't just my aunt's friend. She was family to us. I was only 12 when she disappeared, but I remember her. Brilliant, kind, passionate about her work." Her voice hardened. "I've spent my career at that hospital, watching the Crawfords donate wings and get buildings named after them all, while knowing what they did, what they're still doing." "What do you mean in their new Alzheimer's drug?" Lisa said. "It's being fast-tracked through trials at our hospital. I've seen the preliminary data. It works, Mr. Reynolds. It actually reverses symptoms in early-stage patients." "They stole it," Michael said, his anger rising. "They stole Dr. Lawson's formula or part of it." "I believe they did," Lisa agreed, "but they're missing something. The trials show side effects they can't explain or control. The drug works, but it's unstable and complete." "Because they don't have the full research," Michael said, pieces clicking into place. "They found some of her notes, but not the final formula." Lisa nodded. "That's my guess. And now they're desperate to find the rest before their trials collapse completely." Michael made a decision. "I found her hidden laboratory. The complete research is there, preserved exactly as she left it." Lisa's eyes widened, a look of wonder and validation crossing her face. "She did it. She actually found a cure and died protecting it." "I've documented everything," Michael said grimly. "But I need more. I need proof that connects the Crawfords directly to her disappearance." Lisa's expression became thoughtful. "There might be something. A patient was brought in the night my aunt disappeared, an elderly man with a gunshot wound. He claimed he had been hunting and accidentally shot himself, but the timing always seemed suspicious to me. My aunt mentioned once that this man worked as a caretaker for the Crawfords." "Do you know his name?" Michael asked, his pulse quickening. "Frank Miller." Lisa frowned. "He died about 10 years ago, but his records would still be in the hospital archives. Could you access them?" Lisa hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, it wouldn't be strictly ethical, but given the circumstances, we need everything we can get." "The Crawfords are escalating," Michael said. "They poisoned my well. They're watching the house. They're searching the woods. It's only a matter of time before they make a more direct move." A crash of thunder punctuated his words, making them both jump. Ranger, who had been quiet, suddenly tensed, his attention focused on the window. Michael moved to look outside. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see headlights approaching slowly up the driveway. "Expecting someone else?" Lisa asked, tension in her voice. "No," Michael said grimly, reaching for his shotgun. "Get away from the windows." The headlights grew brighter as the vehicle approached the house. It wasn't the black SUV Lisa had described. It was a mud-spattered pickup truck. As it drew closer, Michael recognized it. James's truck. He lowered the shotgun slightly but remained wary as he moved to the door. James emerged from the truck, hurrying through the rain to the porch. "Michael," he called urgently, "we need to talk now." Michael opened the door and James rushed in, dripping water onto the floor. He nodded a brief greeting to Lisa, then turned to Michael, his expression grave. They know, he said without preamble. Crawford's men found the lab. Michael felt his stomach drop. When, about an hour ago, I was driving back from town and saw them coming out of the woods. 3 men looking very pleased with themselves. They didn't see me, but I heard them talking about finding the old woman's hideout. Did they take anything? Michael asked, dreading the answer. I don't know, James admitted, but we have to assume they'll be back with more men probably tonight. They'll clean the place out. Michael thought quickly. I've photographed everything, all the research, the samples, the formulas, but we need the physical evidence too, the actual samples of the compound. They'll be watching the woods, James warned. Not in this storm, Michael said. Not if they think they can come back later with reinforcements. James looked at him with grudging admiration. You're going back out there right now, Michael confirmed, while the storm gives us cover. Lisa stepped forward. I'm coming with you. I'm a nurse. I know how to handle and transport biological samples. Michael started to object, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. She had as much right to be involved as anyone. More perhaps given her relationship to Dr. Lawson. All right, he conceded. But we move fast, get what we need, and get out. No heroics. He turned to James. Can you stay here with Ranger? I need someone to watch the house, and he knows you. James nodded. Be careful out there. Michael and Lisa donned rain gear and headed out into the storm, the darkness and driving rain providing a natural cloak for their movements. They moved through the forest, flashlights kept low to the ground, following the path Michael had taken earlier that day. When they reached the hidden lab entrance, Michael was relieved to find it still concealed. Either the Crawford men hadn't disturbed the camouflage or they had been careful to replace it after their discovery. They descended into the lab and Michael immediately saw that things had been disturbed. Papers were out of place, binders had been moved, drawers left partially open. But to his relief, the refrigeration unit containing the compound samples appeared untouched. They were searching, not taking, he said quietly to Lisa. They must be planning to come back with proper equipment to transport everything. Lisa was already examining the refrigeration unit. These samples need to be kept at a specific temperature. I can prepare them for transport, but we'll need to move quickly. Take what you need, Michael instructed. I'm going to look for anything we might have missed. While Lisa carefully packed the compound samples, Michael searched the lab more thoroughly than he had before. In his previous visits, he had focused on the research itself, the scientific breakthrough. Now he was looking for something more personal, something that might connect directly to the Crawfords. His search led him to a small cabinet beneath one of the workbenches that he had overlooked before. It was locked, but the lock was simple. Using a small tool from his pocket, he managed to open it. Inside was a single item, a cassette tape recorder, the kind journalists and investigators used in the 80s with a tape still inside. Michael felt his pulse quicken. He pressed the play button, but nothing happened. The batteries were long dead. I found something, he told Lisa, showing her the recorder, but it needs batteries. Check the drawers, she suggested, or Lawson seems to have thought of everything else. Michael searched the nearby drawers and remarkably found a sealed package of alkaline batteries. The packaging was old, but when he opened it, the batteries seemed intact. He installed them in the recorder with trembling fingers and pressed play. At first, there was just a hiss of static, then a woman's voice, clear and resolute. For the record, I am again refusing your offer, Mr. Crawford. My work is not for sale, not at any price. A man's voice responded, dripping with arrogance and impatience. Doctor, don't be a fool. You're a woman playing with plants in the woods. I'm offering you a fortune, a chance to have your name in the history books. Without my company, that formula of yours will rot in this barn with the rest of your quaint little projects. The formula belongs to the people who need it. Lawson's voice replied, unwavering. Not to your shareholders. I will not allow you to patent it and charge a fortune for something nature has provided. There was a pause, and then Crawford's voice dropped, losing its condescending tone and becoming something cold and dangerous. You are making a very serious mistake. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I have built an empire, and I did not do it by letting sentimental old women stand in my way. You will give me that research. It is not a request. And if I refuse, she challenged. The final words on the tape sent a shard of ice through Michael's veins. Then you will have nothing, doctor, and no one will ever find you to ask what happened. Everyone has a weakness. Everyone has something to lose. The tape clicked and went silent, the only sound the faint hiss of the empty recording. Michael and Lisa stared at each other, the implications hanging heavy in the air between them. They had just heard Harrison Crawford directly threaten Dr. Sarah Lawson days before her disappearance. "This is it," Lisa whispered. "This is proof." Michael carefully removed the tape and pocketed it. "Let's get everything we can carry and get out of here. We don't know when they'll be back." And they worked quickly, gathering the most critical samples and documents. Michael took one final look around the lab, knowing it might be the last time anyone saw it intact. Dr. Lawson had built this place as a fortress to protect her legacy, and it had done its job for 30 years. Now that legacy was in their hands. As they climbed the steps to leave, a sound from above froze them in place. Voices approaching through the rain. Michael quickly extinguished their flashlight, plunging them into darkness. "Should be right around here," a man's voice said, barely audible over the storm. "Are you sure? I can barely see a damn thing in this rain," another voice complained. "Crawford said to secure the site until morning. That's what we're going to do." Michael signaled to Lisa to remain absolutely still. They were trapped in the lab with Crawford's men directly above them. Any attempt to leave would expose them. They waited in tense silence, listening to the men moving around outside. After several minutes, it became clear the men were setting up some kind of position, probably a tent or shelter to wait out the storm while guarding the lab entrance. Michael leaned close to Lisa's ear. "We need another way out," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Is there one?" she whispered back. Michael thought hard, trying to remember the lab's layout. Dr. Lawson had been thorough and forward-thinking. Would she have built this place with only one exit? He felt along the walls in the darkness, searching for any irregularity. Near the back of the lab, behind the refrigeration unit, his fingers detected a slight change in the texture of the concrete. It wasn't a crack, but a deliberate seam. Following it, he traced the outline of what appeared to be a small door about 3 feet square. There was no handle, but as he pressed against different points, he felt a section give slightly a hidden release mechanism. With a soft click, a panel swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel. "Emergency exit," Michael whispered to Lisa, who had joined him. She really did think of everything. The tunnel was tight, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. It sloped upward, gently running for what felt like at least 50 yards before ending at another small door. Michael pushed it open cautiously, finding himself emerging from what appeared to be an old hollow log in a different part of the forest, well away from the lab entrance. The rain was still pouring down, providing cover as they made their way back toward the farmhouse. They moved carefully, staying off the paths, aware that there might be more of Crawford's men in the woods. When they finally reached the house, they found James waiting anxiously on the porch, Ranger beside him. "Thank God," he said as they approached. "I was about to come looking for you." "Crawford's men showed up," Michael explained as they hurried inside. "They're guarding the lab entrance, but we found another way out." "Did you get what you needed?" James asked. Michael held up the tape recorder. "This plus the samples Lisa packed. It's not everything, but it's enough." "Enough for what?" James asked. "To go to the FBI," Michael said firmly. "We have Dr. Lawson's complete research proof that Crawford threatened her days before she disappeared, and evidence that their new drug is based on her stolen work. It's time to end this once and for all." As they dried off and examined their finds, Michael felt a growing sense of purpose. After decades of darkness, the truth about Dr. Sarah Lawson was finally coming to light. Her work would not be stolen, her murder would not go unpunished, and her legacy would live on as she had intended to help those in need, not to fill the coffers of those who had taken her life. But as the storm raged outside, Michael knew the most dangerous part of their journey was still ahead. The Crawfords had killed once to protect their interests. They wouldn't hesitate to do so again. Morning came with a pale, unburned light filtering through the windows of the old farmhouse. Michael hadn't slept. None of them had. The night had been spent organizing their evidence, preparing the samples Lisa had retrieved, and planning their next move. "The FBI field office is in Portland," Michael said, spreading a map across the kitchen table. "About 3 hours from here." "We should split up," Lisa suggested. "They'll be watching the roads. If we all leave together, we're an easy target." Michael nodded in agreement. "I'll take the evidence and head to Portland. James, can you and Aunt Eleanor create a diversion? Something to keep Crawford's people occupied here?" "I can do better than that," James said. "I can get word to some of the old-timers in town. There are plenty of folks who've been afraid of the Crawfords for decades, but might stand with us if they knew the truth. And I can access those hospital records," Lisa added. "If Frank Miller was treated for a gunshot wound the night my aunt disappeared, that's another piece of evidence." Michael looked at the two of them, feeling a surge of gratitude. A week ago, he had been alone, a broken man with nothing but his worry and demons. Now he had allies, purpose, and for the first time in years, hope. "We need to move quickly," he said. "Once Crawford realizes what we have, he'll do everything in his power to stop us." They agreed to meet that evening at Eleanor's house to combine their findings before Michael made the journey to Portland. As a final precaution, Michael copied all the digital photos of the research onto 3 separate flash drives, giving one to Lisa and one to James, keeping the third for himself. "If anything happens to one of us, the others still have the evidence," he explained. After Lisa and James left, Michael spent the morning meticulously packing the physical evidence, the tape recorder, the sample vials, and key documents from the lab. He placed everything in a waterproof bag, then concealed it in a hidden compartment he had fashioned in his van. Ranger seemed to sense the tension, staying close to Michael, his dark eyes alert and watchful. Michael knelt beside him, running a hand through the dog's thick fur. "We're almost there, boy," he murmured. "Just a little longer." Around noon, Michael decided to make a final check of the property before heading to Eleanor's. He wanted to ensure nothing valuable had been left behind that might fall into Crawford's hands. As he was examining the study one last time, Ranger suddenly froze. His ears pricked forward, his body rigid with attention. Michael instantly went still, listening. For a moment he heard nothing, then a soft crunch of gravel outside. A footstep carefully placed. Someone was approaching the house, trying to remain undetected. Michael moved silently to the window, staying to one side to avoid being seen. Through a gap in the curtain, he spotted 2 men in dark clothing moving stealthily toward the front porch. They carried no visible weapons, but their manner was unmistakably professional. These weren't local thugs, but trained operatives. Crawford was done with intimidation. He had sent men to eliminate the problem. Michael's military training kicked in. The house had only 2 viable exits, the front door now covered by the approaching men, and the back door, which might already be watched. The windows were an option, but would make him an easy target. He needed a diversion. Moving swiftly but silently, Michael grabbed his shotgun and the small go bag he'd prepared for emergencies. He whistled softly to Ranger, giving the hand signal for silence. The dog immediately went still, awaiting instructions. Michael moved to the kitchen, where he'd left a camping stove set up. He turned the gas on full but didn't light it. The odor would be noticeable within minutes. Then he took a kitchen timer, set it for 2 minutes, and placed it beside the stove. He and Ranger retreated to the back of the house, positioning themselves in a utility room with a small window that overlooked the backyard. Sure enough, Michael spotted a third man stationed by the tree line, watching the rear exit. When the timer went off, its sharp beeping would draw attention, and the gas smell would force the intruders to investigate. It was a small window of opportunity, but it might be enough. The seconds ticked by. Michael heard the front door ease open, followed by the soft footfalls of men entering the house. Then the timer went off, a shrill, insistent beeping that echoed through the empty rooms. "What the hell is that?" one of the men hissed. "Check it out," another ordered, and shut it off. Michael heard movement toward the kitchen, followed by a sharp exclamation. Gas? The whole place could blow. It was the moment he'd been waiting for. With the intruders distracted by the potential threat in the kitchen, Michael eased the utility room window open. He lifted Ranger through first, then squeezed his own larger frame through the narrow opening. They dropped to the ground and immediately pressed themselves against the wall of the house, out of sight of the man watching the back door. Michael pointed silently, directing Ranger's attention to the watcher. The dog understood immediately. On Michael's signal, Ranger darted away from the house, circling wide to approach the man from behind. When he was in position, Ranger let out a single ferocious bark. The man spun around, momentarily distracted. It was all the time Michael needed. He sprinted across the open space between the house and the tree line, keeping low. By the time the watcher realized his mistake, Michael had vanished into the dense forest, Ranger racing to join him. They moved quickly through the woods, following a route Michael had mentally mapped during his previous explorations. He knew these men would pursue, and they likely had communication devices to coordinate their search. His only advantage was his knowledge of the terrain and Ranger's keen senses. After a mile of hard running, Michael paused to catch his breath and listen. In the distance, he could hear shouts and the cracking of branches. The men were following but struggling with the dense undergrowth. "This way, boy," Michael whispered to Ranger, heading deeper into the forest toward a small stream he had discovered days earlier. When they reached the water, Michael and Ranger waded upstream for several hundred yards, leaving no footprints to follow. Eventually, they emerged on a rocky bank and continued their journey, now moving in a wide arc that would eventually bring them back toward the road, but far from the farmhouse. It took nearly 2 hours of careful navigation through the forest before Michael felt safe enough to approach the main road. When he finally did, he was several miles from the farm near a bend where the road curved around a hillside. He needed transportation, and he needed it soon. As if in answer to his unspoken prayer, he heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Michael concealed himself and Ranger behind a cluster of boulders and watched as a familiar truck came into view. Faye Morgan's delivery truck for her general store. Michael stepped out onto the road waving his arms. Faye braked hard, her eyes widening in recognition and concern. "Michael, what on earth?" "I need your help," he said, approaching the driver's window. "Men came to the farm. Crawford's men." Faye's expression hardened. "Get in," she said, jerking her head toward the passenger door. "Both of you." Michael and Ranger climbed into the truck, and Faye immediately accelerated the tires, spitting gravel. "Eleanor called me," she explained as they drove. "Said you might be in trouble. I was on my way to check on you." "Thank you," Michael said, still catching his breath. "I need to get to Eleanor's house. We're meeting there before I head to Portland with evidence against Crawford." Faye shot him a look of surprise and grudging respect. "You're actually going after him. No one's ever stood up to the Crawfords before." "It's time someone did," Michael said. "We have proof he murdered Lawson and stole her research. Enough to put him away for life." Faye was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I'll get you to Eleanor's, but you should know there's talk in town. Crawford's security people have been asking questions, offering rewards for information about you and suspicious activity at the old Lawson place." "How many people would turn me in for a reward?" Michael asked grimly. "Some would," Faye admitted, "but not everyone. The Crawfords have stepped on a lot of toes over the years, made enemies." As they approached Eleanor's driveway, Faye slowed the truck, scanning the area cautiously before turning in. "I'll keep an eye out," she promised as Michael and Ranger prepared to exit the vehicle. "If I see anything suspicious, I'll warn you." Michael thanked her again and made his way quickly to Eleanor's front door. The elderly woman answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting just inside front. "Thank heavens," she breathed, ushering them in. "James called. He said you might be in danger." "Men came to the farm," Michael confirmed. "Is Lisa here?" "Not yet," Eleanor said, her forehead creasing with worry. "She was going to the hospital to check those records. She should have been back by now." A cold knot of anxiety formed in Michael's stomach. "How long ago did she leave?" 3 hours, Eleanor replied. "It shouldn't have taken more than one." Michael exchanged a worried glance with Eleanor. Crawford's reach was extensive. If he had people at the hospital— "I need to borrow your phone," Michael said urgently. Eleanor pointed to an old landline on the wall. Michael dialed the hospital's main number and asked for Lisa Wilson. After a brief hold, the receptionist returned with the concerning news. "Nurse Wilson left several hours ago," she informed him. "She mentioned a family emergency." Michael thanked her and hung up, his concern deepening. "She's not at the hospital, and she didn't mention any family emergency to us." Eleanor's face went pale. "You don't think—" "I think Crawford has realized we're gathering evidence," Michael said grimly, "and he's taking steps to stop us." Before they could discuss further, James's truck pulled into the driveway. The older man hurried inside, his face tight with worry. "The whole town's buzzing," he reported. "Crawford's people are everywhere asking questions, making threats. And there's something else. The sheriff's deputies are looking for you, Michael. They're saying you broke into the old lab at Crawford Biotech and stole research materials." "They're trying to frame me," Michael realized. "Turn this into a criminal investigation with me as the suspect." "It gets worse," James continued. "I heard from a friend who works at the hospital. Lisa was there accessing old records when security detained her. They're saying she violated patient confidentiality laws." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They've arrested her." "Not officially," James said, "but they're holding her for questioning. And guess who's on the hospital board? Harrison Crawford." Michael paced the small living room, his mind racing. Their carefully laid plans were unraveling. Crawford was using his influence to isolate and neutralize each of them one by one. We need to move now, he decided. I have to get to Portland with the evidence we already have. It's our only chance. What about Lisa? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Once I reach the FBI, they can intervene, Michael assured her. But I need to get there first. You can't take your van, James warned. They'll be watching for it, and the sheriff probably has roadblocks set up on the main highways. Then I'll take back roads, Michael said. But I need a different vehicle. James tossed him a set of keys. Take my old hunting truck. It's parked behind the shed. Not much to look at, but it'll get you there and no one will be looking for it. Thank you, Michael said, gripping the older man's shoulder. Both of you, I know the risks you're taking. Just make sure Crawford pays for what he did to Sarah, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly steel beneath the frailty of age. After 30 years, it's time. Michael knelt beside Ranger. I need you to stay here, boy, he said, running a hand over the dog's head. Watch over Eleanor. Keep her safe. Ranger whined softly, clearly unhappy about the separation, but he settled beside Eleanor's chair, understanding his duty. I'll be back, Michael promised, both to the dog and to the elderly woman. With the FBI. He slipped out the back door and made his way to James's hunting truck, an ancient, mud-spattered vehicle that looked like it belonged to any one of 100 local hunters, perfect for blending in. The evidence was secure in his waterproof bag, including the tape recording of Crawford's threats, the samples of the compound, and the photographs of Dr. Lawson's research. It wasn't everything he'd hoped to gather, but it would have to be enough. As Michael drove away from Eleanor's house, taking a narrow logging road that would eventually connect to secondary highways leading to Portland, he felt a grim determination settle over him. This was no longer just about justice for a woman he had never met. It was about protecting the people who had become his friends, who had welcomed him into their community and trusted him with their long-held secrets. For the first time since leaving the military, Michael Reynolds had a mission that mattered, and he would not fail. The logging road was rough, jolting the truck with every pothole and rut. Michael drove carefully, wary of damaging the evidence or attracting attention. The dense forest pressed in on both sides, creating a natural tunnel of green that would normally have been peaceful, but now felt claustrophobic, full of potential threats. He had been driving for nearly an hour when he spotted it, a fallen tree, blocking the road ahead. It hadn't been there when James had used this road the day before. Michael slowed the truck, his senses instantly on alert. This was no accident. This was an ambush. He reversed quickly, intending to find another route, but in the rearview mirror, he saw a vehicle appear behind him, blocking his retreat. He was trapped. Michael assessed his options rapidly. He could abandon the truck and flee into the forest with the evidence, but on foot he would be at a severe disadvantage. He could try to break through the roadblock, but the old truck might not survive the impact. Before he could decide, men emerged from the trees on both sides of the road, 4 of them armed with handguns. Michael recognized one as the man who had been watching his house earlier. These were Crawford's private security, not local law enforcement. That might work in his favor. They would want to avoid official attention. The leader approached the driver's side window, his weapon held casually but ready. Step out of the vehicle, Mr. Reynolds, the man ordered. Hands where I can see them. Michael complied slowly, his mind racing through scenarios, looking for weaknesses, opportunities. Alexander Moore would like a word with you, the man said, gesturing for Michael to move away from the truck. Michael didn't resist as they patted him down, removing his phone and the hunting knife he had stowed in his jacket. But they didn't find the waterproof bag with the evidence which he had secured in a hidden compartment under the truck bed, another of James's hunting modifications designed to hide game from conservation officers during off-season hunting trips. They marched Michael to a black SUV that had pulled up behind the truck. Inside, Alexander Moore sat in the back seat, his expression cold and professional. Mr. Reynolds, he said as Michael was pushed into the seat beside him, you've caused quite a bit of trouble. Where's Lisa Wilson? Michael demanded. Moore raised an eyebrow. Nurse Wilson is cooperating with an internal hospital investigation regarding unauthorized access to confidential records. She's perfectly fine as long as she continues to cooperate. What do you want, Moore? Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. The same thing I wanted when we first met, Moore replied smoothly. For you to sell the farm and move on. But now I'll need something additional. All copies of certain materials you have collected. Research documents, samples, recordings, everything. I don't know what you're talking about, Michael said, his face expressionless. Moore sighed as if disappointed by a child's poor attempt at lying. Please, Mr. Reynolds, we found the hidden laboratory this morning. We know you've been there. We know you've taken materials, and we know you've been conspiring with Eleanor Wilson and her niece to build some kind of case against Mr. Crawford based on absurd decades-old rumors. He leaned closer, his voice hardening. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us where you've hidden Dr. Lawson's research. You're going to sign over the farm to Silver Ridge Development, and then you're going to leave Oregon and never return. In exchange, we'll forget this unfortunate incident, and your new friends will be left in peace. And if I refuse, Michael asked, though he could guess the answer, Moore's smile didn't reach his eyes, then things become much more complicated for everyone involved. Michael weighed his options. These men would search the truck and eventually find the hidden compartment. Even if they didn't, he was now effectively their prisoner. His only advantage was that they didn't know he had already copied the research and distributed it to James and Eleanor. I need assurances, he said finally. I want to see Lisa Wilson make sure she's unharmed, and I want guarantees in writing that Eleanor and James will be left alone. Moore studied him for a moment, then nodded. Reasonable requests. I'll arrange for you to see Nurse Wilson. As for the guarantees, he reached into his jacket and removed a folded document. Mr. Crawford anticipated your concerns. He handed Michael a legal agreement already prepared, promising non-interference with Eleanor Wilson and James Hartman in exchange for Michael's cooperation and silence. Mr. Crawford can be quite reasonable when his interests are protected, Moore commented. Michael scanned the document, buying time, looking for a way out of the situation. These men were professionals, but they were also arrogant, convinced of their power and control. That could be exploited. The evidence is in the truck, Michael said finally. Hidden compartment under the driver's seat, but I want to see Lisa first. Moore considered, then nodded to one of his men. Check it. As the man moved toward Michael's borrowed truck, Moore spoke into a phone, giving instructions for Lisa Wilson to be brought to their location. Michael waited, outwardly calm, inwardly calculating. He knew the man would find nothing under the driver's seat. When he reported back, they would be angered by the deception, but also momentarily confused. That confusion might create an opportunity. Sure enough, minutes later, the man returned, shaking his head. Nothing under the seat, sir. Moore's eyes narrowed as he turned to Michael. Playing games is unwise, Mr. Reynolds. I'm not playing games, Michael replied evenly. I'm ensuring my friend's safety before I cooperate. The evidence is there, just not where I first said. Moore studied him, suspicion warring with pragmatism. Finally, he nodded. A precaution, understandable if irritating. He checked his watch. Nurse Wilson should be arriving shortly. Once you've seen her, you will direct my men to the evidence. No more delays. They waited in tense silence. Michael kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing, formulating and discarding plans. He needed to create a diversion, something significant enough to allow him to escape with the evidence. 20 minutes later, another vehicle approached a white hospital security van. It parked behind the SUV, and two men escorted Lisa from the back. She looked tired and tense, but physically unharmed. When she saw Michael, her eyes widened with a mixture of relief and alarm. 5 minutes, Moore instructed, as Lisa was brought to the SUV. Then we conclude our business. Lisa slid into the seat beside Michael while Moore stepped out to confer with his men, giving them a semblance of privacy. Are you all right? Michael asked quietly. She nodded. They detained me when I accessed Frank Miller's records, but I found what we were looking for, Michael. Miller was treated for a gunshot wound the night my aunt disappeared, and the attending physician noted inconsistencies in his story about a hunting accident. Where are the records? I made copies, Lisa whispered. Hid them in my locker before security came, and I still have the flash drive you gave me with the research photos. Michael felt a surge of hope. Not all was lost. Listen carefully, he murmured. The evidence from the lab is in a compartment under the truck bed. When I create a diversion, you need to get to that truck and drive. Take the back roads to Portland, just like we planned. Go straight to the FBI field office. What kind of diversion? Lisa asked, her voice barely audible. You'll know it when you see it, Michael assured her. Just be ready. Their conversation was cut short as Moore returned to the SUV. Time's up, he announced. As you can see, Mr. Reynolds' Nurse Wilson is perfectly fine. Now the evidence. Michael nodded as if resigned. It's in a hidden compartment under the truck bed. I'll show your men. Moore gestured for Michael to exit the vehicle. As he did, Michael noticed several things simultaneously: the positions of Moore's men, the keys still in the ignition of James's truck, and most importantly, a familiar sound in the distance. Barking, Ranger's distinctive bark growing closer. Michael smiled inwardly. The loyal dog had somehow tracked him, refusing to be left behind. It was the diversion he needed. As they walked toward the truck, Ranger burst from the trees, a gray and white missile of fur and teeth. The dog didn't attack but created instant chaos, barking and circling, drawing the attention of Moore's men. In that moment of distraction, Michael moved. He drove his elbow into the nearest guard's solar plexus, dropping the man to his knees. In the same fluid motion, he grabbed the man's handgun and fired 2 quick shots into the air, creating more confusion. "Run!" he shouted to Lisa, who didn't hesitate. She bolted for the truck, Ranger racing to her side as if understanding the plan. Moore's men recovered, quickly drawing their weapons, but Michael had positioned himself behind their fallen colleague, using him as a shield. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of military training. "Or this gets worse for everyone." The momentary standoff gave Lisa time to reach the truck. She scrambled inside, started the engine, and began to maneuver around the fallen tree, which wasn't as completely blocking the road as it had first appeared. Moore, showing surprising composure, raised his hand slowly. "Think about what you're doing, Reynolds," he said, "and this won't end well." "It already hasn't ended well," Michael replied. "For Dr. Lawson, for 30 years of lies, but it ends today." As Lisa successfully navigated past the roadblock, Michael began backing away, keeping the gun trained on Moore and his men. Ranger stayed with him, growling at anyone who moved toward his master. "This isn't over, Reynolds," Moore called as Michael reached the edge of the forest. "Crawford will never stop coming for you." "Count on it," Michael replied, then turned and sprinted into the trees, Ranger at his heels. He knew Moore's men would pursue, but the forest was dense, and Michael had the advantage of Ranger's senses to navigate and detect followers. They moved swiftly through the underbrush, putting distance between themselves and the road. After nearly an hour of hard travel, they reached a small clearing with a view of the valley below. Michael paused, catching his breath, and pulled out the satellite phone James had given him, an old but functional device that Moore's men hadn't discovered during their search. He dialed Eleanor's number. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "It's me," Michael said. "Lisa's safe. She's on her way to Portland with the evidence." "Thank God," Eleanor breathed. "What about you?" "Ranger and I are heading back to town," Michael explained. "There's something I need to do." "Michael, it's too dangerous," Eleanor protested. "Crawford's people are everywhere." "Trust me," Michael said. "I have a plan, but I need your help. Can you contact everyone you know who's ever been wronged by the Crawfords? Tell them to meet at the town square in 2 hours." After ending the call, Michael and Ranger continued their journey, circling back toward Pinecrest. He knew Moore and his men would be searching the roads to Portland, assuming he was trying to follow Lisa. They wouldn't expect him to return to the very place where Crawford held the most power. As they approached the town, Michael stopped at a small hunting cabin James had mentioned, a place where the older man kept emergency supplies. Inside, Michael found what he needed: clean clothes, a first aid kit, and most importantly, a working radio that could receive local police bands. He listened to the chatter, confirming his suspicions. Sheriff Bailey had deputies searching the highways for Michael Reynolds, described as a dangerous fugitive. There was also mention of a woman in a truck wanted for questioning Lisa, but Michael knew the back roads James had recommended would keep her well away from these patrols. After cleaning up and changing clothes, Michael and Ranger made their way cautiously into town. As they approached the square, Michael was astonished to see dozens of people already gathered, with more arriving every minute. Eleanor and James stood at the center, surrounded by townspeople of all ages. "What's this?" Michael asked as he joined them, keeping a wary eye out for Crawford's security or the sheriff's deputies. "You asked for people who have been wronged by the Crawfords," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Turns out that's most of the town." James nodded in agreement. Once word spread that someone was finally standing up to Harrison Crawford, people started coming forward. Everyone has a story: land seized through questionable means, jobs lost over refused bribes, environmental damage covered up. Michael looked around at the gathered faces: farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, all watching him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. I can't guarantee this will work, he warned them. Crawford is powerful connected. So are we, said a voice from the crowd. Fay Morgan stepped forward. When we stand together. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. These were people who had lived too long under the shadow of a corrupt, powerful family. They were ready for change, ready to reclaim their town. Michael was about to speak when a commotion at the edge of the square caught everyone's attention. Sheriff Bailey and 4 deputies were approaching, hands on their weapons. "Michael Reynolds," Bailey called, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering, theft of intellectual property, and assaulting security personnel." Michael didn't move. "On whose authority, Sheriff?" "I have sworn statements from witnesses." "Paid witnesses," Michael interrupted. "Just like you're paid to look the other way when the Crawfords break the law." The sheriff took a threatening step forward, but found his path suddenly blocked by townspeople, dozens of them forming a human barrier between the law enforcement officers and Michael. "You'll have to arrest all of us, Victor," Eleanor said, her voice steady and clear, despite her age. Bailey looked uncertain, for the first time confronted not by a single outsider, but by the united front of his own community. "This is obstruction of justice," he blustered, but with less conviction. "No," came a new voice, strong and authoritative. "This is justice finally arriving in Pinecrest Valley." The crowd parted to reveal a woman in her early 50s, flanked by several men and women in dark suits. She held up a badge. "Special Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI," she announced. "Sheriff Bailey, you and your deputies need to stand down immediately." Bailey's face went from red to ashen. "This is a local matter." "Not anymore," Agent Martinez cut him off. "We've been building a case against Harrison Crawford for months. Securities fraud, bribery of public officials, environmental violations, and now potential involvement in a 30-year-old homicide." She turned to Michael. "Mr. Reynolds, I believe you have information relevant to our investigation." Michael nodded, relief washing over him. "Lisa Wilson should have reached your Portland office by now with evidence regarding the disappearance of Dr. Sarah Lawson." "She did," Martinez confirmed. "Quite impressive evidence, including a recorded threat from Harrison Crawford himself. We have agents taking Mr. Crawford into custody as we speak." A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by a rising murmur of conversation. 30 years of fear and intimidation broken in an instant. Sheriff Bailey seemed to deflate before their eyes, his authority evaporating. One of the FBI agents approached him, speaking in low tones. The sheriff reluctantly surrendered his weapon and badge. Agent Martinez turned back to Michael. "We'll need your full statement, Mr. Reynolds, and we'll want to speak with everyone who has information about the Crawfords' activities over the years." "You'll have plenty of volunteers," James said, gesturing to the assembled townspeople. As the initial shock wore off, the atmosphere in the square transformed. Decades of pent-up stories began pouring out, people stepping forward to share their experiences with FBI agents who had set up impromptu interview stations. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing a flood of truth that had been held back for too long. Michael found a quiet corner of the square to give his own statement, Ranger lying patiently at his feet. He recounted everything, finding the journal, discovering the hidden lab, the attempts to intimidate and silence him, the confrontation with more. "You took quite a risk," Agent Martinez commented when he had finished. "Confronting someone like Crawford without backup." "I had backup," Michael said, glancing at Ranger, then at Eleanor and James, who were giving their own statements nearby. "The best kind," Martinez smiled slightly. "Still, it was brave and thorough. The evidence you and Ms. Wilson collected is compelling. Combined with what we already had on Crawford, it's enough to ensure he'll spend the rest of his life in prison." "What about the research?" Michael asked. "Dr. Lawson's cure for Alzheimer's." "That's beyond my jurisdiction," Martinez admitted. "But I've alerted colleagues at the FDA and NIH. They're very interested in examining the compound. If it's as groundbreaking as it appears, they'll ensure it's developed properly and made available to those who need it." That evening, as the FBI continued their work in the town square, Michael returned to the farmhouse with Ranger, Eleanor, James, and a newly returned Lisa. The house felt different now, no longer haunted by secrets and danger, but peaceful, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Sarah would have been proud," she said softly, "not just of the justice, but of what will happen with her research. It will help so many people. What will you do now, Michael? Lisa asked. Will you stay? Michael looked out at the overgrown fields, the ancient trees that bordered the property, the house that still needed so much work. He thought of the empty apartment in Portland, the ghost that had driven him to this place, the purpose he had found here. Yes, he said, feeling the rightness of the decision settle in his bones. This is home now. James raised his coffee mug in a toast. To new beginnings and to Sarah Lawson, who made them possible. They all raised their mugs, even Ranger barking softly as if understanding the significance of the moment. The celebration, however, was short-lived. Just before midnight, Michael was awakened by Ranger's low growl. The dog stood at the bedroom window, hackles raised, staring into the darkness. A moment later, Michael heard it too, the soft crunch of tires on gravel approaching the house with headlights off. "They're here," James whispered from the doorway, shotgun in hand. "Crawford's people." Michael moved quickly, waking Eleanor and Lisa. "Get to the basement," he instructed. "There's a root cellar with a hidden compartment. James knows where." "What about you?" Lisa asked, concern etched on her face. "We'll hold them off," Michael replied, checking his own weapon. "The FBI knows where we are. Agent Martinez said she'd send backup first thing in the morning. We just need to last the night." "Crawford was supposed to be in custody," Eleanor protested. "His people aren't," Michael said grimly. "And they're loyal. Moore must have decided to take matters into his own hands." As James led the women to safety, Michael positioned himself at an upstairs window with a clear view of the driveway. 3 vehicles had pulled up, 2 SUVs and a heavy-duty truck. Men were disembarking, at least a dozen of them armed and moving with military precision. In the lead was Alexander Moore, his face hard in the moonlight. "Reynolds," he called out, "we know you're in there. Come out now, and no one gets hurt." Michael remained silent, watching as the men spread out surrounding the house. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an execution squad. Crawford had realized he was going down and had ordered a final cleanup, eliminate all witnesses, destroy all evidence. "You have 1 minute," Moore shouted. "Then we come in, shooting." Michael's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The nearest FBI agents were hours away. But he had one advantage. He knew this house, and now, thanks to his renovation work, he knew every weak point, every entrance, every hiding place. "James," he called softly, "remember how we reinforced the east wall? It's time to use that." James nodded, understanding immediately. During their repairs, they had built a false section of wall designed to look weak, but actually reinforced with steel plating, a defensive position. Michael had insisted on his military instincts, refusing to leave the house vulnerable. As Moore's countdown reached 0, the first shots rang out. Windows shattered and bullets thudded into the wooden siding. Michael and James had already moved to their prepared positions, returning fire only when they had clear shots, making each bullet count. Ranger crouched beside Michael, silent but alert, ready to warn of any approach from behind. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. 2 of Moore's men were down, but they still had superior numbers. Then a new sound cut through the gunfire sirens, growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, reflecting off the shattered glass on the floor. "Police, FBI, drop your weapons!" a voice boomed through a megaphone. Confusion erupted among Moore's men. Some tried to flee. Others surrendered immediately, dropping to their knees with hands raised. Moore himself made a dash for one of the SUVs, but found his path blocked by Ranger, who had burst through a broken window and now stood snarling, teeth bared, between Moore and escape. Agent Martinez was the first through the door, weapon drawn. "Everyone all right?" she called. "We're here," Michael answered, lowering his shotgun. "All of us." As the FBI agents secured the scene and took Moore and his men into custody, Martinez approached Michael. "We were coming to check on you before heading back to Portland," she explained. "Good thing we decided on an early start." "Good thing," Michael agreed, one hand resting on Ranger's head. The dog had returned to his side, vigilant even now. "Moore will face additional charges for this," Martinez said, watching as the lawyer was handcuffed and led away. "Attempted murder, among others. And we found something interesting when we arrested Crawford." She handed Michael a folded document. A kill order signed by Crawford himself, dated the night Dr. Lawson disappeared. It mentions Frank Miller by name as the executor. Michael stared at the paper, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Miller was injured that night. He must have confronted Lawson, and she fought back. "We think so." Martinez nodded. Ballistics from a bullet found at the lab site matched a gun registered to Miller. We're reopening the investigation into Dr. Lawson's disappearance as a homicide. With this new evidence, we'll finally be able to give her family closure. Eleanor had emerged from the basement and overheard the conversation. Tears streamed down her face. After all these years, she whispered, Sarah will finally have justice. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The FBI established a command post in Pinecrest, interviewing dozens of residents about the Crawfords' decades of corruption and intimidation. Harrison Crawford and Alexander Moore were both denied bail, deemed flight risks due to the severity of the charges and Crawford's extensive international connections. The most stunning development came 3 days after the shootout at the farmhouse. Based on information provided by one of Moore's men in exchange for leniency, the FBI conducted a search of a remote section of the Crawford estate. There, in a wooded area marked only by a small stone cairn, they found human remains. DNA testing confirmed what Eleanor had known in her heart for 30 years. They had found Sarah Lawson. The official cause of death was a gunshot wound to the chest, but evidence suggested she had wounded her attacker before succumbing to her injuries, explaining Frank Miller's mysterious hunting accident the same night. As the legal proceedings against Crawford continued, another aspect of the case took center stage. The National Institutes of Health assembled a team of researchers to evaluate Dr. Lawson's work on the phantom fern compound. Their preliminary findings were stunning. The compound works, Lisa told Michael one evening as they sat on the now repaired porch. She had joined the NIH team as a local liaison, her nursing background and personal connection to Dr. Lawson making her an invaluable asset. Better than anyone expected, it not only halts the progression of Alzheimer's, but actually reverses the damage in 83% of test cases. Crawford knew what he had stolen, Michael said. That's why he was so desperate to find the complete formula. The irony is, if he had just worked with Sarah instead of trying to steal her research, he could have been part of one of the most significant medical breakthroughs of the century, Lisa said. His greed cost him everything and almost kept this cure from the world. The NIH fast-tracked the development of what they now called Lawsonite in honor of its discoverer. Unlike Crawford's version, which had been incomplete and unstable, the true formula was remarkably safe and effective. Clinical trials began within months with results so promising that regulatory approval was expedited. Meanwhile, Michael continued his work on the farmhouse. What had begun as a desperate escape from his demons had become a labor of love and purpose. James worked alongside him almost daily, teaching him the finer points of carpentry and construction. You've got a natural talent for this, James commented one day as they finished installing new windows in the living room. Ever consider making it your profession? Michael had in fact been thinking about his future. His military pension, while modest, covered his basic needs, but he wanted to do more than just exist. He wanted to contribute to build something lasting. I've been talking with Agent Martinez, he said. The FBI is considering establishing a permanent field office here, given everything that happened with Crawford. They need someone who knows the area, someone with training. They've offered me a position as a liaison. James nodded approvingly. You'd be good at that. But what about this place? He gestured around the half-renovated house. That's the other part, Michael continued. Lisa and the NIH team have been discussing the need for a research facility focused on medicinal plants from this region. Dr. Lawson believed the phantom fern was just one of many undiscovered remedies in these forests. You're thinking of turning the farm into a research center, James said, understanding dawning on his face. The Lawson Research Center, Michael confirmed, a place where scientists can continue Sarah's work, where her legacy can live on. The idea took root quickly. With support from the NIH and a substantial grant from a pharmaceutical company eager to make amends for its past association with the Crawford Biotech, plans for the Lawson Research Center moved forward rapidly. The old barn was converted into a state-of-the-art laboratory, while the farmhouse itself became administrative offices and housing for visiting researchers. The overgrown fields were transformed into experimental gardens, where plants with potential medicinal properties could be cultivated and studied. 6 months after the confrontation with Moore, the center was ready for its official opening. Reporters from across the country gathered to document the event, drawn by the compelling story of a 30-year-old murder solved, a corrupt empire toppled, and a medical breakthrough that promised to change millions of lives. Eleanor, resplendent in a blue dress that matched her eyes, cut the ribbon at the entrance. My sister believed that nature held the answers to our most challenging medical problems, she told the assembled crowd. She gave her life protecting that belief. Today, we honor her sacrifice by continuing her work. The ceremony was followed by a tour of the facilities, which now employed a dozen full-time researchers and support staff, with more positions to be added as the center expanded. Lisa Wilson had been named Director of Clinical Applications, responsible for translating laboratory findings into practical treatments. As the festivities wound down, Michael found a quiet moment alone in what had once been Dr. Lawson's study. The room had been restored to its original condition, with her desk and bookshelves returned to their places. A portrait of Sarah, painted from photographs Eleanor had provided, hung on the wall, her intelligent eyes seeming to watch over the room with approval. Ranger lay at Michael's feet, gray muzzle resting on his paws, content in the knowledge that his territory was secure. The dog had become something of a mascot for the center, accompanying Michael on his daily rounds and greeting visitors with dignified courtesy. "We did it, boy," Michael murmured, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "We brought her home." A soft knock at the door interrupted his reflection. Lisa stood in the doorway, her expression serious. "The first shipment of Lawsonite is going out next week," she said. "Initial distribution to 30 hospitals across the country, with international expansion planned for next month." Michael nodded. "How many patients in the first phase?" "Over 1,000. Lisa replied, a smile breaking through her professional demeanor. 1,000 people who were losing themselves, who will now have a chance to come back. She moved to stand beside him, looking up at Sarah's portrait. "Sometimes I wonder what she would think of all this, if she could see what her work has accomplished." "I think she knows," Michael said simply. The sound of Ranger's soft woof drew their attention to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the experimental gardens, bathing the new growth in golden light. In the distance, the forest stood dark and mysterious, still holding secrets waiting to be discovered. "There's something else," Lisa said, turning back to Michael. "The NIH team found another compound in the phantom fern, something Sarah mentioned briefly in her early notes, but never fully explored. They think it might have applications for treating PTSD. Michael looked at her sharply. "How effective?" "Early results are promising," she said carefully. "They're asking for volunteers for the first human trials." Michael thought of the nightmares that still sometimes woke him, the memories that ambushed him in unguarded moments, the years lost to the bottle, as he tried to silence the ghosts in his head. He thought of the other veterans he knew, men and women fighting the same battles long after they'd left the battlefield. "Sign me up," he said. 1 year later, the transformation of the Lawson farm was complete. What had once been a dilapidated house haunted by tragedy was now a thriving center of healing and discovery. The Lawson Research Center had expanded twice, adding new laboratories and greenhouses to accommodate the growing interest in botanical medicine. Lawsonite had exceeded all expectations, with over 10,000 patients worldwide showing significant improvement. The stories were remarkable: grandparents recognizing their grandchildren, again retired professors returning to teach musicians, remembering the pieces they had composed decades earlier. The new compound, now named Serenity, had proven equally promising in treating PTSD and other trauma-related disorders. Michael, as one of the first test subjects, had experienced the benefits firsthand. The nightmares had diminished, the startle response calmed, the crushing weight of memory lightened to a manageable burden. He still had difficult days. No medicine could erase what he had seen and done, but for the first time since returning from war, he felt truly present in his own life. He could think of the future without dread, remember the past without being consumed by it. On the anniversary of his arrival at the farm, Michael stood on the porch of what was now his permanent home, watching as the staff and researchers gathered for the center's first annual community celebration. Tables had been set up on the lawn, laden with food prepared by Faye Morgan and other local volunteers. Children played tag between the experimental garden beds, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. James approached, moving a little slower these days, but still strong, a glass of lemonade in his hand. "Quite a change from when you first drove up that driveway," he observed, nodding toward the gathering. "I was running away then," Michael acknowledged, "looking for a place to hide." "And found a place to stand instead," James said. "Sarah would have liked that. She was a fighter too, in her own way." Eleanor joined them, leaning slightly on Lisa's arm. At 80, she had become the center's beloved matriarch, sharing stories of her sister with new staff members and offering wisdom accumulated over 8 decades of life in the valley. They're ready for the dedication, Lisa told Michael. He nodded and followed them to where a small crowd had gathered around a stone memorial at the edge of the property. It was a simple granite marker engraved with the Sarah Lawson's name, the dates of her birth and death in a single line. She found the cure and gave it to the world. Michael stepped forward, Ranger at his heel, and placed a small bouquet of phantom ferns at the base of the stone. The pale, translucent fronds seemed to glow in the afternoon light. 1 year ago, I came here broken, he began, addressing the assembled guests. I had lost my family, my purpose, my hope. I was a ghost in my own life. He looked around at the faces before him, Eleanor and James, Lisa and Faye, the researchers and staff of the center, the townspeople who had stood with him against Crawford. What I found here was more than an old house or a scientific discovery. I found a community willing to stand for truth even when it was dangerous. I found friends who became family. I found a purpose worth fighting for. He rested his hand on the cool granite of the memorial. Sarah Lawson never got to see her work completed. She never knew how many lives she would save, how much suffering she would prevent. But her legacy lives on not just in the medicines derived from her research, but in the courage she showed in protecting that research with her life. Michael gestured to the center buildings behind him, to the gardens and laboratories where Sarah's work continued. This place exists because one woman refused to surrender truth to power, because she believed that healing should be available to everyone, not just those who could afford to pay. He paused, looking out at the forest that still surrounded the property, the ancient trees that had sheltered the phantom fern for centuries before humans discovered its secrets. There are more cures out there, he said quietly. More healing waiting to be found. That's the real legacy of Sarah Lawson, not just what she discovered, but what she inspired others to seek. As the ceremony concluded and the guests returned to the celebration, Michael remained for a moment at the memorial, Ranger sitting patiently at his side. The dog was showing his age now, his muzzle more white than gray, but his eyes were still bright and alert, missing nothing. "We did good, didn't we, boy?" Michael murmured. Ranger leaned against his leg, a warm, solid presence, as always understanding more than a dog should. Together they walked back toward the farmhouse, no longer a broken-down shell haunted by tragic history, but a place of healing, discovery, and hope. Michael Reynolds, once lost in his own private battlefield, had found not just a house but a home, not just a purpose but a mission, and not just peace but something far more precious, redemption. In saving Sarah Lawson's legacy, he had saved himself.